Hello and welcome to the Arkane Retrospective. I'm your host, the astronomer, Dylan Musk, and I have two guests with me today that are going to go on this journey. We got the false Ilcid, Kirklin Patzer. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing very good. As I was telling you, Dylan offcast, I was playing a lot of Hogwarts Legacy last night, but I'm excited to bench that for now and talk some Arkane
hmm
Studios. I think this will be fun.
And then, of course, we have the squashed beast, Dante. I guess it's afternoon for you, so how you
Yeah,
feeling this afternoon?
East Coast gang. I'm doing good. Like I was saying beforehand, a little under the weather, but it's
hmm
curbed that a little bit because we're talking about something pretty interesting. And Kirkland and I was in the same boat. Had to put a pause on wizarding for a bit.
Yeah, well, it looks like we all were doing that. But this game also has quite a bit of a magic system to it, so we'll talk about that. But yeah, today
True.
we are getting into the Arkane Retrospective, starting off with the studio's first game, Arx Fatalis. And yeah, just a quick kind of charting this thing out. We are going through all of Arkane's catalog except for one game. So today is Arx Fatalis. Next up is Dark Messiah of Might and Magic. Then we're doing the Dishonored trilogy, Dishonored, Dishonored 2, and Dishonored Death of the Outsider. And then Prey will be closing it off. We are not doing Deathloop only because, well, all three of us have talked about Deathloop a lot on the podcast. Me and Kirkland did a 3 hour long review, and then me and Dante talked about it quite a bit in the Game of the Year discussions of, I guess, 2021. So there's a lot of coverage for that. And then at some point, we're going to be doing a ranking where we rank all the games. We're going to rank the best levels, characters, weapons, all that good stuff. Don't know yet if that's before or after Redfall. We'll figure that out at a later date. And then obviously we're doing this leading up to Redfall, which comes out May 2nd, I believe it is. The latest and greatest and very different looking Arkane game as well. So we'll talk
Totally.
about that at some point later. Yeah, I mean, I'm so excited we're doing this. I've been saying for years at this point that I think Arkane might be my favorite studio. And the more I've thought about it and the more even going back to this older stuff, I can very happily say that right now they're my favorite studio in the biz. Just year after year making consistently like my game of the year or like just all-time favorite games. And going back to this older stuff, it's a bit different, but just like from Dishonored all the way up to Deathloop, just everything that I release is exactly what I'm looking for. And so I'm very curious to see what Redfall is because that is, like I said, very different in terms of format and stuff for them. And I'm glad you guys want to join me on this kind of crazy adventure. Because, yeah, this studio, especially the early years, very, very under the radar. And even then, I feel like it's really just Dishonored and Deathloop have been like the huge marquee games that everyone's talking about and knows about. But even within that, like there's other Dishonored games that people never really talk about. So I'm very excited to get into that. Let's quickly just go through our history. So for me, I kind of just mentioned it, but since Dishonored, I've played everything that they've released. So Dishonored 2, Prey, obviously Deathloop. The one weird one is I have played Dishonored Death of the Outsider, but I for some reason only played like a level or two, played a couple hours, and then dipped. So I've never actually completed the game. So I'm very excited
Really?
to find, even though I love Dishonored, right? It's
Yeah, that's
strange.
surprising. Honestly, I think that game's really good.
I
Too.
and I'm sure it is. So I'm excited to finally go through and play through the whole thing. And
It'll be
then
a treat.
yeah, about a year or two ago, I did jump into Arcs, and there was just big issues on the tech side of things, and I kind of just dipped. So we'll talk about that later in the episode. So I have tried a little bit of Arcs previously, but then yeah, in this last month going through it, and still I have not booted up Dark Messiah yet. I was waiting until we get to the retro for that. So that's like funny enough, that's like the holy grail for me. That's the final puzzle piece of Arcane that I got to put together, and then obviously Redfall later this year. So Kirkland, I think your history is quite a bit shorter,
Yeah.
but you want to go through it real quick?
Yeah, mine's pretty shallow compared to yours, but yeah, no, my first Arcane experience would have been that first Dishonored. I just remember like seeing it at E3, whatever year it was, and it like blew my mind because it was exactly what I was looking for in like a stealth action adventure type game like that. The systems too, I don't know what it was, but I just remember at the time too, I was comparing it a little bit to like BioShock, and I just love that game so
Mm-hmm.
much. There was something to it that just had that magic, and yeah, I got it. Absolutely loved it so much. Ended up like buying it again on PC like years later with like the Game of the Year edition or whatever to get the
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
DLCs, and I just love that game so much. I don't know what it was. I replayed it all the time. so much fun. All the DLCs were great. And then Dishonored 2 came out. I was really hyped for it, and then I just never got it. And I don't know. I feel like I needed
the story
a
of all too many people, unfortunately.
yeah, I needed a good excuse. So I'm excited to go along with you guys on this Arkane retro, because then I'll actually be able to get through it. Because something like Arx, I don't think I ever would have played in my life if I didn't have like a a reason like this to get in there. Which yeah, I'm excited to talk about it. Definitely some positives, some negatives, and then the only other one would have been Deathloop. Obviously, Dylan and I talked a lot of hours on that one. So yeah, not a lot of Arkane experience, which is kind of interesting because I really liked the games that I played of them. So yeah, this will be lots of fun, I think.
And okay, quick question too, because as of Redfall being at Xbox Studios now, this game's only on Series X and PC. Is your PC strong enough? Are you even gonna be able to play Redfall this year, or are you gonna have to be on the bench for that one?
Well, I'll have to do some digging and research and comparisons. Who knows? Maybe I'll have to buy
maybe play on the lowest settings possible, like I did with
Yeah.
Deathloop on my laptop, just like worst graphics ever. But I'm like, nothing's stopping me from playing this.
Yeah.
Cool. Dante, how about you?
Yeah. So similar to, I think, both of you guys, kind of got my start with Dishonored. I'm a huge Half-Life 2 fan. Like, Half-Life 2 is my favorite game of all time. And the architecture design of Dishonored was done by the same guy who did it in Half-Life 2. So I was like, all right, I definitely need to see this thing out, figure out what this is about. Had no history with Arkane, but like realized it was going to be semi. So I was like, okay, I like Deus Ex. I like just a lot of games in that style, like Thief, right? Traditionally, like, so those are some games that I was like super into. So I figured I would dig it, and I did. Strangely enough, I think every single Arkane game I've played except for Deathloop and now Arx, I have played half of it, put it down for like 2 years, and then picked it back up and beaten it and loved it and been like, why the hell did I bounce off of this the first time? Yeah, it's definitely curious to see, like, as we go back through these, to figure out like why that is, like what that like lull point for me is. But always still feel like incredibly engaged with like the mechanics and like the sim and like stealth mechanics that they put in those games. I think they're really kind of stand on their own and do some really interesting stuff that I don't think a lot of other developers are playing around with. So yeah, definitely interested in digging into these further. I've played all of them. So I'd say before we go back through these, I think my favorite is Dishonored 1 and maybe like Prey right after that. Deathloop is so fresh that I don't necessarily know if I want to put it in the running just yet, but I think Deathloop might actually like make its way up to the top a little bit. But yeah, no, big fan of everything they've done, even though I've like had to kind of pound the drum a little bit in that game, like to get through them.
Have you finished Dark Messiah? Because I know you started that
Halfway through.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
maybe a little farther than halfway through. That game cooks, man, but we'll get into that.
Sweet. Yeah, so before we talk about Arx, I wanted to go through the history of the studio because, as I mentioned, like pretty much everything pre-Dishonored, no one really knows anything about. So I think it's interesting to go through that because there's a lot more there than just the two games that that they released technically. So and including two games that you guys have mentioned already in this. So we'll get into that. So let's go through this. I'm going to kind of rifle through this, but if there's anything interesting you guys want to break down, interrupt me. And there's certain points where I'll ask you guys certain questions too. But yeah, so Arx Fatalis was the first game released by the studio in 2002 on PC. And I found this very surprising. That also released on the original Xbox, which wild. I would be so curious to see the control scheme of that thing in particular. And I went to one of the used game stores by my house recently. I found it. It was fucking $95 to get that original disc. And I considered it. I first did a Google. I was like, is this thing backwards compatible on Series X? Could I actually play this, or would I have to dig out my 360? Who knows if that works? I don't have an original Xbox. And unfortunately, it's not backwards compatible. So I was like, okay, this is not... I was like, for the science of it, to have this tested for the retrospective would be good, but it wasn't going to work on the Series X. So I didn't end up picking it up. But interesting that it was on consoles originally. The studio is founded by Rafael Colantonio, who's very important. He pretty much is Arkane for many, many years. And yeah, he kind of brought along some friends of his that wanted to make like-minded games, weird immersive sim, RPG sort of adjacent things. And Arx has an interesting history because it was originally potentially going to be Ultima Underworld 3. They were working with EA on potentially making this like part of their IP. But I think there was too many just creative differences between what EA was looking for and the weirdo shit that they wanted to release actually for a game. So that didn't end up going ahead, obviously. And then in terms of how well it did, not very well. Critically, it actually did pretty good, pretty solid reviews on this thing, but just commercial failure. No one knew it existed. And I think a big reason for that is, well, one, they're a small studio, probably didn't have a huge marketing budget, but this game also came out just mere months after The Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. And if you compare the two, you could say both of them have pros and cons, but Morrowind, just in terms of how expansive it was, also an established IP at that point, I feel like in many ways Arx just didn't stand a chance. And our Morrowind 2 was a case where early RPG that was on the original Xbox. So even that element of Arx that could have been unique, no, just throw it out the window. So no one knew about this thing's existence. And then moving on, their next release was Dark Messiah of Might and Magic. It released in 2006, also PC and Xbox. So very early adopters of the Xbox. We'll talk about that later on. And this was interesting because they were working with Ubisoft as a publisher who I think liked what they did with Arx and thought that they could, rise them up. And so that's why they brought them into the Might and Magic IP. And that's what they were like, okay, make a sort of Arxy thing, but with Might and Magic. And so we'll talk about how much they were able to do that in that episode. I still haven't played the game to comment on that. But also at this time, which is weird because the first game didn't do amazing, but they were able to open a second studio. So the first one was in Lyon, and now they had a second studio in Austin, and we'll talk about the differences between those two studios coming up. And this one was kind of the opposite, where a little bit better on the sales front, still not great though, and this one had pretty middling / bad reviews. People did not like this game, and so I'm very curious once again to get into that and see what about it was causing that. And then notably, Harvey Smith is another big name to know for Arkane. He joined the studio in 2008, so after Dark Messiah. And then, so those are the kind of the early years, just those two games. And this next period I'm going to call the Dark Ages. This is a very kind of tumultuous time for Arkane Studios. So first is very random. They released this game called Karma Star, which was like an iOS game in 2009. I don't know if you guys have an iPhone. If you could look. I'm assuming it is not still available, but give it a search. Karma Star, one word.
We're really failing in doing our retrospective if Karma Star is not on the list. We got to get through that.
Yeah, I mean, I highly doubt it still shows up on the new App Store. Plus, I don't have an iPhone, so I don't think I'd have the chance. But yeah,
lots of astrology apps popping up.
Yeah.
Yeah, no games. And this is a weird one. I could not find like anything about this. I could find like a couple screenshots, but there's really no info of this thing. And I think it was like they just needed money, and so they just did this contract for a thing. I don't think it was like some huge creative immersive sim idea that they wanted to bring Karma Star to your iPhone. Next up was one of the first of three, I'd say, pretty relevant canceled games from the studio. So the first one's called The Crossing. And for all of these canceled games, there is a ton of footage, especially go check out the No Clip documentary in Arkane Studios. That is a fantastic documentary, and you see a lot of gameplay for all these things. But The Crossing is an incredibly interesting concept where it's essentially like a single-player first-person shooter sort of campaign game, but then in almost like a Deathloopy sort of way, there's essentially just a multiplayer deathmatch going on as you're playing through this level, right? So you're going through, you have like objectives, you have like a linear place you need to get to, but then there's just also this multiplayer battle like going on over top. So you can understand why this could be such a design challenge, why it never saw the light of day, but incredibly ambitious game. And I thought it was cool to bring up just because they did a very simpler version of this, but Deathloop, kind of that idea of the invasion system, they had tried that all these years ago in a much more, ambitious way, of course, but didn't end up, that game never came to be. But if you look at it, like, in terms of style and stuff, it's a much more basic game. If you look at footage, you wouldn't pick it out as an Arkane game just in terms of the art style and stuff. Hopefully, I'm sure it had great level design, as all their games do, but kind of an interesting title. Next up is another canceled title. This one, I think, got a lot less far along, But I don't know if you guys remember this. Back in the day, Steven Spielberg was really interested in the gaming space, and he was putting a lot of money into different studios trying to make some things come to light. One of those did release. It's called Boom Blocks. It was like a Wii game that's essentially Jenga. It's like a physics game that I loved. I loved the game. Yeah, it was it was so fun. I really want to go back and play it someday.
Way better than it has any business being.
I know, it was great. It was just Jenga on crack. It was so good. Kind of like a Angry Birds sort of style too, I guess, in a way, in terms of the physics element of it. But more 3D and all that. But another game that he had funded but ultimately didn't see the light of day was a game called LMNO. And so Arkane wasn't the sole developer on this. They were just not really a support studio, but I think they had really just, when they were making this project, it was so ambitious that they're like, okay, this studio will make this section of the game, and it was essentially you kind of escort this alien character through this world, and there's just a ton of interaction. And if you watch footage, like, it's a very interesting looking game. But once again, I don't think this one got very far in development. I think Arkane was maybe one of the smaller studios working on it in terms of how much of the game that they were going to conceivably make, how many levels and all that. But then more relevantly, so Dante, you kind of mentioned this, but for many years, this is like maybe the saddest cancellation of all of Arkane Studios, is that they worked on Half-Life Ravenholm, which there is a ton of footage for this game. There's at least like 10 mostly finished levels. This thing was far along and ended up getting canceled. So Dante, what is that prospect like of Arkane making a Half-Life game? Does that just break your heart that this thing never finished?
This would have been excellent. Like, Ravenholm is notoriously like one of the best levels in Half-Life 2, like super spooky, tons of physics stuff going in. That's like really when they like introduced the gravity gun. I would have loved to see Arkane like go ham on some Source engine era, like tons of physics based puzzles and stuff like that, and like, I don't know, murder sim situations that they could have put you in, because like Ravenholm has so many moments where you like click on a switch and this like blade spins around and you can just like set up all of these like domino effects.
You can make like electricity, like currents and stuff. It's a really interesting looking game.
I think they could have taken that and done some insane stuff with it, because that's like really where Arkane shines, and not so much Valve, honestly. Like, I think Valve did kick-ass stuff with that in that time, but man, they could have taken that and done some impressive stuff. So yeah, sad.
I think it was, is Dark Messiah made on the Source engine, right? So yeah, I think that's where they kind of, Valve saw their chops there, even if the game didn't review the best. They at least saw potential there and brought them in to do this thing. But yeah, very, very sad. And I think one thing interesting too, when I was watching footage of this, that this is very much about like you're fighting off like zombie hordes and stuff like that, which I wonder how much of Redfall is them, that's vampires, but it's still a similar idea, is them dipping back into that well, or even some of the tech, or thinking on like some of the design that they'd created back in that time. So once again, I like looking at these canceled projects because I think you see a lot of these ideas come up again in their later works. Like these things didn't go to waste, even if they didn't see the light of day.
They don't shy away from mechanics or reusing mechanics in their games. Like, if something works, or if they feel like they can get close, or they got close to something, they're like, you know what, we can just try this one more time and really nail it. I wouldn't be surprised.
Look at how many their games have a teleport, right? Like,
I know, the same teleport too.
Mechanics, If it ain't broke, don't fix it, kind of thing.
Right.
Next up here, and this is something that did release, but they were more of a support studio on it, but they did a bunch of level design on BioShock 2 and art and stuff like that. So they, I think, worked on the first 6 levels of the game. And I when I played BioShock 2 recently, it was the first time I played, it was a couple years ago. I didn't really feel like, oh, this was so arcane compared to the first BioShock game, but it is still interesting that they did work on that, which Kirklin, you mentioned too, that, kind of had that BioShock feel to it. And in many ways, it's probably because, they worked on BioShock and they had a lot of those chops from that. So that's kind of interesting too.
Yeah, that's funny. I didn't know
that. Okay, next up is, this is pretty big. We're out of the dark ages. All those canceled games, support studio working on these random weird things. And once again, go check out the No Clip documentary. Go watch gameplay of these things, because especially Half-Life, like, that is such a heartbreaker. And even in that documentary, you just see the heartbreak still on those developers to this day, that like, man, we could have made this Half-Life game, and that would have been such a huge thing for the studio. But in 2010, the studio was acquired by ZeniMax / Bethesda. as we know them today. And then they created Dishonored. So that released in 2012 on pretty much everything at this point, right? All the PC, Xbox, PlayStation, all that stuff. And this was really like the taking off point for Arkane. Obviously, for all of us, is the first game we played, and I think most people's Arkane journey has started with Dishonored, and it had huge sales, great reviews, like all that stuff. It was finally like all the hard work these developers put in had kind of got across to the masses and all that. So that's fantastic for them. They also, I did not realize this until I was doing some research. I don't know if you guys knew about this, but Arkane didn't develop this, but Bethesda essentially put this contract out there that there was this game called Dishonored Rat Assassin that released on the iOS. Have you guys ever heard of this thing? No. It is essentially a Fruit Ninja knockoff where you are slicing rats, and if you accidentally slice a bomb, it blows up. The weirdest thing, but I did not realize that there was a fourth Dishonored game that exists. Once again, I don't know if this is up on the app stores still to this very day, but just so weird that existed, and only would have been because Bethesda had some extra money to throw around on the marketing side, and they're like, let's just make this small iOS game in 2012, which I guess is a good timing. For
sure,
iOS
the retro.
PETA had a field day with that one. And gone once again. They scrapped that one. It does not live on in the iOS store.
In 2013 is when a lot of the Dishonored DLC came out. The Knife of Dunwall, Bring More Witches, which we'll discuss a lot of that in the retro as well, because that's some pretty awesome DLC. And then from this point forward is when we mentioned that in 2008, I think it or 2006 is when there was a second studio opened up, and from this point forward is when both those studios are working on their own projects. Up to this point, Dishonored was made in part by both of those studios working together, but from this point on, we split off. So looking at Arkane Austin, that's the studio that worked on Dishonored 2, and that released in 2016. And then the other one, Arkane Lyon, worked on Prey, which released in 2017. So Dishonored 2, I think pretty great reviews still, but didn't sell quite as well. Prey also got I think middling to okay reviews, but pretty poor sales, unfortunately. I think Prey was kind of doomed in a way because Bethesda bought that IP and then for some reason threw that IP tag on top of this game that had nothing to do with the original Prey. It was nothing like the original Prey. So just a weird thing that I think put a bad taste in people's mouth, and worth noting that was not Arkane's decision whatsoever. They were not, let's make a Prey game. It was Bethesda slapping around money and deciding to do that. So very interesting. And Prey at this point too is also the final title from Rafael Colantonio, the original founder of Arkane Studios. He left after this game released, and I'm excited to talk about some of the similarities between Arx and Prey, because I feel like there is surprisingly quite a lot of them. Moving ahead, Prey Moon Crash, which is a pretty substantial DLC, released in 2018. And then also in 2017, Dishonored Death of the Outsider released, which instead of kind of being DLC, it was essentially a standalone spin-off that they did within the Dishonored 2 engine, which is why they were able to crank it out so quick. That was, of course, by Arkane Austin. And then there's a bit of a weird period where in 2019, they worked as a support studio on Wolfenstein Youngblood and Wolfenstein Cyberpilot, which I had never, ever heard of Cyberpilot. It was a VR title.
Isn't that the VR game?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, they to some extent worked on those two games. Obviously, they're not the main developer, so I don't really know exactly what they did on those games. But now that they're in house with Bethesda, worked on those things. And then in 2020 is when Bethesda was acquired by Microsoft. So Arkane got picked up by Bethesda, and then that got picked up by Microsoft. So now they're an Xbox first-party studio, you could say. But of course, that took time for that to go out. So Deathloop, which was released in 2021, was weirdly a PlayStation exclusive after they were an Xbox-owned company. And Deathloop, great reviews, pretty decent sales. And then eventually came to Xbox and is now on Game Pass, of course, as well as all the titles now backwards. Well, not all of them, but definitely, Dark Messiah, Ubisoft published, is not chilling on Xbox. Game Pass, unfortunately.
One.
But even Arx is available on Game Pass for PC, of course. And then, so as of this point, Deathloop was developed by Arkane Lyon, and Dinga Bakaba is the new studio head over there. Really funny guy, just in interviews. He's a really cool guy, so I'm curious to see what their next title is. And then this is not Arkane, but I thought it was worth shouting out that in 2022 is when Weird West came out. That's Rafael Colantonio's new indie studio, making, not first-person games anymore, but definitely still immersive simi in its DNA. So shout outs to that. You can go back, check out our review, or me and Dante talked about that quite a bit last year as well. And then now that leads right into 2023 with Redfall, which is releasing in May 2nd. That's by Arkane Austin, so the studio that did Dishonored 2 and Dishonored Death of the Outsider. And that will be finally an Xbox exclusive now that time has passed on that acquisition. So yeah, there you go. There's the kind of brief history of Arkane Studios. Once again, go check out that No Clip documentary for a lot more info and to see gameplay and some of this stuff, because it's such an interesting history. But anything there you guys wanted to bring up, or should we move along to Arx?
Yeah, depressed about Ravenholm.
Yeah,
we spoke of real sad stuff, and also kind of interesting that I'd say they co-developed those Wolfenstein games with Machine Games, and it's really sad that they were attached to, I think, 2 of the lesser received Wolfenstein games, because those other 2 Wolfenstein games are incredible. So like, and I know that Youngblood I bounced off of, and then I never even touched Cyberpilot. So I wonder how actually that one is. I should give that a spin.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I feel like usually if a studio is, needing support, so they need a support studio in this case from inside the publisher's house, it's probably because the game's not in the best place, or they're working on so many projects. But if you look at what's come out from that studio in since then, like not a lot, right? So I think that is maybe a weird case where things weren't going great. They got a support studio, and then that just kind of spreads it too thin in a way. But yeah, I've never picked up those games, and I don't have VR obviously, so I don't really know what's going on with those 2 titles. But at some point, I'll replay them or check them out.
They were like, Arkane can ship and finish a game. Maybe we just need them to help them get it out the door here. That might have been all that they needed to add to it. So yeah, I don't think it stains them at all or anything like that.
No, I don't think so. Okay, good stuff. Let's take our first break, and then we'll get in. We'll finally be talking about Arx Fatalis. Okay, we are back. Arx Fatalis, what an interesting game. Not open world, but also not just like strictly level design in terms of how it is, but definitely RPG, immersive simi in its DNA. I'm going to throw over to Kirkland first. What are just kind of your overall thoughts on this game now that we have all rolled, well, Kirkland, I'm assuming you got to the end of it and you rolled credits on it? Okay.
Credits.
So we've all rolled credits on this thing. Kirkland, what did you think?
Yeah, so a couple weeks back when I first plugged it in, I actually started Dark Messiah first because I thought that was the first game initially. I was like, man, what a great title this is. And then jumped into Arx, and initially my first impressions weren't great. I didn't love the system of like switching between like selecting on the UI and like actually like moving your character. I kept like forgetting the controls too, so I constantly was like, I don't know how to interact with this thing. I feel like I didn't have like a dedicated time slot to just like play it for hours initially too. Like I kind of had like fragmented sessions initially, and like that made it tough to just remember what I was doing. There's not like really there's sort of a quest log with your journal, but like it's pretty minimum. So I just felt lost, and I'm like, man, I know this is a pretty lengthy game. This is gonna be a rough playthrough. But like once I got going with and like just got used to the controls, got used to the systems, I definitely had a lot of great moments with this game. And I think it has like a lot of interesting like world like stuff, I guess, that it introduced. It is interesting that you mentioned it was supposed to be, what was it called? Ultimate Underworld?
Ultima
Underworld. So I haven't looked into what that one was, but I'm just curious like how much of like the just I guess the lore and like the inspiration of like just all of that stuff was taken from that. Because I found that to be like probably the most interesting thing for the game. For me, honestly, was just like the world that it set up, and just how like Arx was founded, and like just all these different like sub factions of races and everything. Like for me, that was the most interesting thing for sure. And there was a lot of like ambitious things I came across, like the magic system that just like blew me away when you like first like raise up your hand and you're just doing these motions. I'm like, what the hell? Like I've never experienced a system like this. Like that's really amazing.
All these voices.
Yeah, exactly. And like I think another thing that I want to give it credit for is just like the overall tone. Like it really feels like a dark, cold world that you're just like living in these little like rat holes essentially. So yeah, like I said before, like I think there is a lot of great stuff from here. It's just I think the datedness of it definitely affected my enjoyment overall. It seemed like a type of game that if I came across like as a young kid this would have just like stuck with me for the rest of my life and been like, this is one of the greatest games I've ever played, and like just completely like set the foundation for like my gaming career. Because I don't know, like I would like. I feel like I could even compare it a little bit to something like Morrowind, where Morrowind, I never played it back in the day, but I feel like if I did, the datedness of it wouldn't affect me at all, and I would just like see it for just the top-notch quality of what it is. Dylan, you could definitely speak to
That's
that.
me.
So.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think because it is dated, I had a little bit of a struggle to power through it, but I definitely am glad I did, because this was definitely a fun experience for sure, and the overall story, it had some turns I was not expecting like at all. I'm excited to talk about some of the combat stuff, because I definitely feel like I cheesed the majority of the game, because man, there's like, especially near the end of the game, holy crap, this game is hard. This game is extremely challenging. The last boss took me so many tries to get through it. But yeah, no, I think that's my overall general thoughts. I'm excited to get into the nitty-gritty with you guys. The cooking system, that was something I was like pleasantly surprised on. I feel like I love when games do that sort of thing. So again, that's something that I just felt like was so ahead of its time. The fact that you had to like actually cook your food properly. I was getting a little bit annoyed by the end when I'm like in combat. My character's just like, I'm hungry. I'm like in the middle of attacking someone. He's just like, I'm hungry right now. It's like, oh, it kind of sounds like me.
me too, but I'm gonna put the game down and go like,
yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's amazing. Dante, why don't you take it off? How about you?
Yeah. I'd say I overall enjoyed this. I do feel like we kind of talked about that at the top. I do think some other games coming out around this time hurt it for me as well. Just like I was thinking about like, okay, when did this game come out, or when did this game come out? And like Morrowind came out before this, or like right before this. Deus Ex is before this. Thief 2 is before this. There's like a laundry list of like truly like some of the best of all time that hit like right around this, that were kind of doing some similar ideas. But I do think Arx has carves out a nice little corner for itself in having those like really novel ideas that they play around with that kind of set them apart. Like the magic system, the cooking system's really cool, like combining or like I really thought that the way that you sold things to people was a little like quirky as well, just like dropping it in their chests, and this guy has like a room full of like treasure chests, and you just like literally just like pull and drop things in there. And I thought that was like, I don't know, just like interesting inventory stuff. The inventory system was a bit frustrating. I will agree, like going in back and forth between like this left click right click thing to like get in and out of your inventory just feels a little janky. I did not play the standard version of Arx Fatalis. I think I should shout out, I played Arx Libertatis,
I think.
Libertatis.
Yeah.
I played through that like mod pack of the game, which I played for about 3 or 4 hours without that, and then started over with this mod. And if anybody is interested in picking this game up, I highly suggest adding that mod pack on it. It only really works on the Windows version of the game, so it doesn't work with the Steam version. That's just a heads up. But it fixes a lot of issues I had with it, where like I think the magic system is actually like super cool, and when I was playing it without that mod pack, I found it to be incredibly frustrating because I felt like I was like doing the symbols over and over again. So the magic system, you kind of like move your mouse around in a motion, and you do like a different combination of different like signals or signs, and the combination creates a spell. And in the original version, I just could not get any of them to work. I also was having crashes. I was having like weird scaling issues, and this like truly fixes all of that. It adds a bunch of like aliasing. It fixes the way that you draw all of the spells, so like they all land almost every single time. Yeah, just a bunch of nice, pretty UI fixes. Everybody looks a little better. I don't know, it's a game from early 2000s, so they still look a little dated, but a nice like clean coat of paint on an old game. So yeah, definitely would recommend that. Yeah, like I said, kind of overall enjoyed it. I don't know if we'll get into it later, but had some really frustrating parts at the end of that game, to the point that I almost put this game down. Like I was telling Dylan, I was like, they made a choice at the very end of this game that is one of the most like absurd game design decisions I've ever seen. Like, well, I don't know. If as we work our way through the game, I'll talk about that last door here in a bit, because goddamn, that really tilted me.
Are you talking about the Akba statue things? Is that what you're talking about?
Those like moonstone things or whatever, the meteor stones.
Mm-hmm. Weird stuff.
I lost a lot of those. I did not take that thing seriously at all, and they were scattered all over the world. Still, there was one in a vendor's chest. I sold one, so I had to go to every single NPC throughout the game.
Weird
and
stuff.
Find this fucking thing. I'll talk about it more later. Overall, solid early 2000s jaunt though. It felt like a nice history lesson. And it does a lot of things good. It does some things bad.
Yeah, I'm gonna echo a lot of what you guys are saying, but Kirkland, pretty much like copy paste what you said. I feel like my initial thought when I was 2-3 hours into this thing was, man, if I played this thing as a kid, this would have been one of my all-time favorite games. Morrowind is like my favorite single player game of all time. And if I had played this kind of near or around that same time, I think I'd probably still favor Morrowind as a all-timer kind of game. But I think I would have just loved this thing too. And I think specifically part of the frustration for us, I think, came in that we are trying to beat this game, right? And I feel like if I was just a kid and I was just fucking around in this world and really treating it as a sandbox and not really caring if I am going to roll credits on this thing, I feel like that's just such a different way to engage with it, which if you do that in this game, you will never beat it because of how obscure some of this stuff is. But no, I really enjoyed my time going through this thing. And, I said I would have loved this thing as a kid. I still really love it now. And it's not without just a ton of caveats and a ton of struggles. And Dante, to your point, there were multiple times where I thought I was essentially soft locked. I thought, this is too hard. I don't think I'll be able to beat this thing. And as Kirkland said, a lot of cheesing. I cheesed so many encounters in this game, which was almost like a bit of a mini game on itself. Like, how can I get this enemy to fall off this bridge? Or how can I glitch up onto this, little statue here, and then the enemy can't hit me, and stuff like that. I mean, the Ice Dragon too. You better believe he got glitched on that pillar, and I was over there firing arrows at him for half an hour.
Well, I'm excited to talk about that. I did not fight him.
Yeah, I know there's multiple ways you can do that.
You can do in this game. That's I don't know.
But yeah, I mean, the hugest caveat for me here, of course, is the performance. This thing does not operate on modern hardware very well. I pulled through. I played through this thing on vanilla, and it took me hours to get used to it, I would say. And particularly the menus were just like, they run at 2 frames per second or something, and I ended up getting used to it. I played through the whole thing. This is a game I will definitely replay at some point, and I will make sure I get that mod downloaded. But I tried, and it was not working on my PC for whatever reason. But next time I'll definitely fight harder. But this is a game I will be replaying in my life, not in every year kind of thing, but I think this is one I definitely want to go through, because there is different endings and different play styles and stuff like that. But Kirkland's earlier point too, the thing that blew me away about this was just how ambitious this game is, particularly from a studio making its first game, right? Like, there is a fully fledged out combat system and RPG mechanics with stats. The magic system is so in-depth and so interesting and so expansive. There's weapon crafting and repairing. There's potion making, stealth, pickpocketing, lockpicking, cooking, and hunger. There's physics objects and interactable objects everywhere. There's full voice acting in this thing, which Morrowind didn't have. There's different endings. Like, this game did so much, and because of that, it probably spread itself too thin in some ways. But I just found it so interesting how much was packed into this thing. Once again, from a studio's first effort, is insane to me. So I am so glad I went back and played this thing, and I have a lot of love for it. And I think if anyone's listening to this retro and you haven't played an Arkane thing before, do not start here. That's my caveat. I think for me, I enjoyed this thing so much as a history lesson, as I'm an Arkane diehard fan, and I love to go back and see what their roots are. But absolutely, start with Dishonored 1 without a question. Yeah, and if you like Dishonored, play the other Dishonoreds. If you maybe want more sci-fi, go check out Prey. If you want go play Deathloop on Game Pass. That game's amazing too. So like I think do not start here. Come back here once you are a fan of the studio, if you become a fan, because from that perspective, it becomes a lot more interesting as well. But yeah, I really love this thing, and I think my final point here too is like not just the performance, but there is zero chance I would have beat this thing rolled credits without a guide. No way. There is some stuff in here that is so obscure, as you're mentioning with those Akba stones. There are many other moments too where without a guide I would not have beat this thing, which for the sake of this retro we all wanted to roll credits on this thing. But there's still a ton more in this game that I could see in terms of side quests and different ways to do things, as you mentioned with the ice dragon there too. But yeah, that's too bad, because I ideally like beating games without guides, and I think I'm more a fan of using guides these days than I have been in the past. But still, like, there is just some stuff in here that is incredibly obscure, and that's too bad at times as well.
Yeah, I mirror that 100%. Like, I tried to get through about maybe the first 25% of that game without a guide, and it got to a point where I was like, there is no way. There's so much like obtuse like puzzle mechanics or like backtracking that is like required, and you get lost too easy to figure out like where you're supposed to go, sadly.
Or even like I could not figure out how to use the fast travel points until I looked up a guide on like how exactly that worked, which made the experience a lot better. I will say one thing, because your character moves pretty slow, and there's a speed spell, there's fast travel, there's other ways to get around. But one thing that was very helpful, I'm doubting this worked on your guys' version of the game, but since the game's frame rate was so bad, whenever I hit quick save, the game would like freeze for a second, and then I would teleport like 2 or 3 times further along than I would have normally walked in that time. So when I figured that out, I was using that so much to get around. You should have seen me like speed running this thing through the Dwarven Mine. I was like kicking around corners, flying past that beast, because I'm no shame. I cheese this thing so hard with the frame rate quick save glitch. Like, and it's not something I saw in a strategy guide or something. I was just like figured it out at some point. And sometimes I also used it and flew off a cliff into some lava. So I had to be careful with it, but it was a very very powerful hidden spell that I had discovered in that game. I love it. Okay, let's get into talking about some of the specifics here. I wanted to start with a kind of a interesting point for me, was that to me I found like just in terms of the general design, in terms of similarities with the other Arkane titles, for me the thing that was closest by far was Prey. And as I mentioned, it's interesting that was the first and last title from Arkane by Rafael Colantonio, but particularly the world design, right? The way this thing, like it, Dark Messiah, is that like level based in the way Dishonored is?
Yeah. It feels a lot like strangely enough, it being a Source engine game feels a lot like Dishonored or like a Half-Life, where you're going through these like chapters and you are not kind of exploring the larger world by any means.
But even, Deathloop is very much a level-based thing. The way you go through it is very strange. But yeah, I mean, really it's just Arx and Prey then that have this design that's, I guess you would call it like more Metroidvania-like, and that you're doing a lot of backtracking through areas you've been before, and then things will change. And so I thought that was interesting just in terms of how the world is constructed. Some other similarities, the inventory system, right? This is kind of the Resident Evil, Diablo sort of inventory system where, bigger, stronger items take up more room in your backpack, and you have to organize it. Man, when you finally get that backpack, what a great moment that is to have twice as much inventory space as you did before. Hopefully you guys found a backpack at some point.
Oh yeah, there's like, I found 3 total, I think.
Right, there's another one in the ice caves that you can get later on too, right?
I got 2. And then I found my last backpack, and it was like your inventory is already full. Like it's already as large as it
Wait,
can be.
how many slots? Because I only ever got like one, I guess, 3. Backpack. Interesting.
Or maybe that's Libertatis thing.
Oh, maybe.
So maybe they added some more inventory space in the game too.
Or maybe I did get a 3rd, but I found that just playstyle not picking up so many weapons. I guess I didn't find the inventory to be much of an issue once I was a bit further in.
Yeah.
But here's a very random thing too, that this is not just a Arx Prey thing, but the leaning mechanic, right, where you can hold, I guess, Q or E and your character leans around corners, which for a game that has a lot of stealth in it makes a lot of sense. But I always just kind of assumed that that was an innovation that Dishonored had done, and maybe Dante, you could speak on like Deus Ex or Thief maybe have something like that. I don't know what would be the first game that did that kind of thing, but I thought it was so interesting that once again, for whatever reason, way back here, they decided to include leaning in their game when it's like your first time studio. How do you have time to implement like a lean mechanic when it's such a just added? And I found like I didn't really need it as much as you do in Dishonored to do stealth encounters, but to me that was so interesting that it had that mechanic. Of course, has different endings like Prey does. But here's a fun thing too, and I've been playing Prey again the last couple weeks. In Prey, you can go around, and one of the collectibles you can find is this essentially like D&D character sheets that the characters in that world or like have their campaign going on. That campaign in that game is called Fatal Fortress, which is what Arx Fatalis is Latin for. So I thought that was such a fun callback connection that they had too. So I really like that. I don't know how intentional some of these things are, but even like there's a lot of astronomy stuff in this game, strangely, even though you're underground, and obviously Prey's in outer space. So yeah, just a lot of similarities to me, particularly with Prey, but of course some of these things are across all Arkane titles.
Yeah, leaning. I remember, I might be wrong here, but I feel like that's a Thief thing. I feel like maybe that's like original.
That would make sense.
Thing. Like I think Thief came out in like the late 90s, like 97, 99, something like that. And so it would just been on the cusp of this. So they probably saw that and were like, that's not a bad idea, especially with something being so stealth driven like a Thief game would be.
Yeah. Kirklin, you were talking about the kind of lore and atmosphere, I guess, how you really enjoyed that. You want to talk more about that? And you've been like explain like the hook of this game, because I thought the hook was fantastic too.
Yeah, just this like basically a society of underminers. they can't go to the surface. I was a little bit disappointed that I never actually got to go to the surface. I was very much getting like Metro 2020 or what is it, 2033, like those vibes for sure, where you just have this like cold, desolate surface world that like especially in this one, because you never go there. I assume we were going there at some point. I'm like, I can't wait to see what's up there and just like what sort of, I don't know, demons or bad guys or what's going on. But like you also just have this like society of like women that were just like worshiping this like serpent god, so just turned into these like snake creatures. The fact that you had like goblins who are like the classic enemies, but like they also just like they also kind of just intertwine a little bit with like other society. Like there's good goblins, there's trolls that work for the goblins, and just like all of these little like social structures I just found so fascinating, because I did not expect that get into it. I expected, okay, the first enemy is a goblin. I'm like, hey, these are going to be the enemies all the way through. And then, yeah, there's some that you're like working with at periods. And it very much just like, I think, yeah, like I said, like it just surprised me, because I was expecting the surface level RPG where you just go around, the humans are the good guys and you're just killing like goblins or whatnot, but it was deeper than that. The dynamic between like the Sisters of Eternium, I think that was their name, and like how they kind of work along like with the kingdom, and then they also kind of have like their own goals. It was so intriguing to me, and like that's where I'm like, man, like I feel like this like I don't think we're entirely done with this like Arx Fatalis idea. I know we might.
We'll talk about that
a little
at
bit
the end
later.
Yeah,
exactly. But yeah, like and like the way that the magic worked and everything, and the explanations for how the world went on. Like I found myself for like hours just reading the novels and something like this, which is funny because comparing it to other Arkane titles, I did that all the time in Dishonored. Like I feel like that was the first game that I was really picking up like every note and reading it and like trying to see if there's a hidden thing here, or if it is just lore based, which is still good because it's well written and everything like that. So yeah, it's a dated game, but I felt the Arkane isms very much soak through in those moments.
They give you good reason to dig into a lot of that stuff. Like there's mechanic reasons to go through and like read every book or read every, like I know the races of Arx gives you a hint on how to deal with the dragon later on. Like there's like all types of like cool little things that you can pull from if you are like paying extra attention, and not just like obviously getting the extra lore, which is it really does kind of craft that world where you do feel like you're just like stuck in these caves for this, like the extent of this game, but like there's so much more to this world that they built out, which is I don't know, it's pretty impressive. Like it's rare that there's that much world building in a game like this, especially in that period.
Especially in their first title too, like the
machine.
Like it's so
a new IP and all that. Yeah,
so ambitious. Yeah,
yeah. It's like was he writing a book before this and was like, you know what, actually, like there's so much there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think for me too, it's the the atmosphere in this game is fantastic, where this game is terrifying in many moments, but even just like the music and the sound design of like just this whistling wind that just feels so cold, as the especially when you come across those like essentially those barricade kind of things, and if you get close to it, you can just hear the wind like pounding through, and you can just imagine in those moments like how fucked up the surface of this planet is if like these strong cold winds are blasting deep within the caves here. And yeah, I love that, like it really just kind of felt endless in a way, just these sprawling labyrinths underground, and how deep they went and how dark and demented it gets the deeper you go, especially when you get to like they call it like the evil mushroom forest, whatever they call it, with like the rat characters in there, and then all those strange pustule things on the walls and whatnot. But I love the music too in this game. It is dark and creepy, and above all else, just very weird. Like the theme that plays when you're in the city of Arx, and it's almost like I don't even know how to describe it, but just like the weird melody that's over top of everything, that is like some magical flute sort of sound that's on top of like the dark fantasy sort of themes and stuff like that, is very bizarre. But I found it like very compelling and really kind of put me in this place once again. And yeah, I loved all the different races and the relationships between them. And, you know, there's multiple human settlements that all have their different motivations, and they're warring with each other at times, working together with each other at other times. And one thing I didn't realize when I was playing the game too, that I heard on like another podcast talking about this game, was that like there's a whole economy going on between the trolls and the goblin. You can like manipulate it in certain ways too. And I don't know how exactly you do that. I guess just by like selling and buying certain things. And I don't know exactly how you do it, but like that's just like some whole other mechanic on top of it that really goes into this relationship. And that kind of makes me want to ask how you guys went about that certain sequence in the game when you're talking with the trolls, and you need the trolls to open up the passageway, essentially between Arx and the castle settlement and the tavern. And so you have to essentially go, I forget what it is. It's like a bust or some sort of statue, right? The troll statue that's somewhere in this goblin base. How did you guys do that? I'm curious how you ended up solving this, or how you didn't solve it. But yeah, I'm curious.
I'm curious as well, because like I feel like for me it felt like there was one way, but I know there's multiple ways. But I was like, okay, they are leading me towards this this cooking mechanic, right? In that period where you kind of you work through like working your way into the goblin settlement. I guess I'm trying to remember exactly. You get like a passage from a gem dealer, and you're like, okay, I have gotten approval to make my way in here, and they finally let you into this the like kingdom of the goblins, right?
Yep.
And you end up trying to get into talk to the king, and he's not having it. The door is closed, but you see this guy walking back and forth from the kitchen over and over again. And then this is kind of like, I guess, their way of tutorializing this like cooking mechanic we were talking about previously, where you learn that he's like really allergic to grapes or wine or something like that, and it like causes some tummy issues for this man. So you go and you find what he's using to produce his dinner, and I guess he was like ready for dessert. So there's this pie, and all the stuff for the pie is laid out on the counter, and there's like flour, and then over to the side there's some red wine. And if you read something along the way, or you hear somebody talk about it, I can't remember exactly how, you learn that he is allergic, and you can pour the wine into the flour and kind of create a pie and set it up kind of like, or I don't think you actually have to make the pie at that point. I think you just have to spike the flour, and that way the cook comes in and finishes the recipe.
Exactly. Yeah.
And he walks the pie in there, and then the like doors to the throne room bust open, and the leader of the goblins like runs to his room, and he is just like parked on the toilet the rest of the time. And it makes it kind of gives you an opportunity to like explore further and dig into some of the puzzles and stuff like that in the throne room. What else can you do?
Well, because I mean, to get the crown itself, or I forget what it is, that statue, the crown, whatever the item you need from the trolls is, like essentially you just need a specific key and to go into that one chest in like the armory room. And so you could essentially, you don't really have to poison the king, right, to do any of that. Essentially, you just need that one key, right? Or I guess you need a key to get into that armory as well. Because
Mhm.
I don't know about you guys, I don't know if I ever was able to successfully lockpick like anything in this game. Yeah, like maybe once or
Not
twice.
once.
But I feel like my stats were not high enough, or some other reason. I'm not sure. But I tried all the time, but I could not figure out how to get into that room. But yeah, I mean, because as well, like one of the keys you need is like under that one goblin's pillow in his room, right? Which is so funny because that's like a Morrowind thing. Like I feel like I'm conditioned to check under pillows all the time in games now if I can. Most games don't let you do that. But in Morrowind, Elder Scrolls games, I'm always ripping the pillows off beds to see if there's anything under there because I know back as a kid I encountered a sword or a key or something under there. And so it's funny that that's how you get the key from under this guy's pillow. But I funnily enough, in this game, I did not try that. Or I think I'd removed many pillows, but I hadn't found anything to that point in the game. So I'm like, okay, there's probably nothing under here. So I never checked under that one. But ultimately, the only way I could ever have enough freedom to go around that place and get the right doors was to kill everyone. I killed every single goblin in that place.
God.
That was a funny situation where I
I guess that is a way. I was like, how else do you do it? And,
Yeah.
like, Murder Simulator is definitely...
The trolls were not happy about it because they're like, well, you just
No.
fucked our economy over. Like, we don't have a way to make money anymore. But that was a situation where I probably spent 3 or 4 hours doing that. And I had like 7 or 8 different saves of like, okay, I went down, I killed this guy, I'm gonna do like make a backup save here, and then actually, I didn't really like that, so I went back, and it was very fun. It was like almost like a little immersive sim in and of itself as how to beat this one scenario, but just trying to get into their armory and steal their gold. And then there's like a rune that they have up on the upper bridge, and I tried so many times to jump and get over there and stuff like that. But I had a lot of fun with that sequence, just pushing it on all sides and trying to figure out how I could possibly get this troll idol. So I tried doing it non-lethally. I tried killing everyone, and ultimately that was the only way I was able to do it. But it was not without a bunch of cheesing. And the way I did this, Kirkland, I'm curious to hear how you were able to fight off some of these goblin captains, whatever they call the stronger ones, was I'd run outside, I'd run across that bridge, and if I went at a very specific angle, don't ask me how I figured this out, just once again, hours in this sequence. If I went across the bridge outside and went a little bit to the left, they would run and they would fall off the bridge into the water below, and it wouldn't kill them, but they would just like be, they would be de-aggroed, and they would just stand down there. And so eventually I was doing all this, and I could look down and there was like 5 or 6 troll kings like all down in the water. And then eventually, though, because I was spending so much time here, eventually they start walking back in. So I'm trying to exit the place, and then more of them are coming after me. And then for hours after that, whenever I'd go back through that area, there was just goblins all over the place because I hadn't killed all of them, but I had at least dispatched enough of them at the time. But it was a very, very fun sequence, albeit very janky and very unclear as to what exactly I should be doing. But I had a lot of fun with that sequence.
So all the goblins dead, the dragon's dead. Like who lived in your playthrough? This seems like the opposite.
No
of
one.
pacifist.
I left them alive. I didn't fight any
Nice.
of them.
I was going to say I did like a full pacifist run. I think practically.
That's amazing.
I killed many trolls in my playthrough. So this kind of gets back to like why how I cheesed this game too, because when I started playing the game, I played it vanilla initially and just kept having issues, and then I got that Arx Fatalis mod as well. I don't know if I just didn't save the initial one, but it just like I had to like make a new save
You got to start over.
There you go. I was like, did I just not save? Luckily, I wasn't like hours in by any means. I wasn't too far in. But and again, when I was researching for the mod, as I was downloading, I was just reading some guides or whatnot. And in the very, very first room, there's like, air quotes, a cheat that you can do where you like there's this chair and there's 2 bones. You can pick up the bone on the left, and if you take that bone and click on the chair 10 times, you just get like a stacked inventory of items.
Yeah.
And that is essentially what I had for the entire game.
That's like right out the prison, right? Like immediately as you enter the prison. Yeah.
You get a full like Ilcid armor set, which is
You get
hilarious.
Ilcid armor? Oh
which is
my
hilarious
God.
because in every
That's so
cutscene
good.
you're just wearing this Ilcid armor, and like the first time that you arrive to Arx, it's like we just got attacked by the Ilcids, and they're like describing what they look like, and you're just like wearing one of them. I'm like, oh, okay,
I'm surprised that they didn't factor that in. That feels like an Arcane thing to do, or like if you're wearing this armor, they'll like tag you as a bad guy or something.
Yeah, no, nobody cared. So I had it for the entire game, which is hilarious because it's like the second last area that you're in. You're just fighting these Ilcids that are wearing this armor that I've had for this entire game. You get a meteor saber, which is essentially like the super god weapon that you get at the end.
Oh my god, that's insane.
Literally, so I had this for the entire sequence. So anytime that there was a combat or a stealth sequence or something, I would like one shot these goblins with this like super powerful weapon. My armor is so strong that like I didn't really like struggle for a good portion of this game because of that. So yeah, definitely big asterisks on my completion. But also I was just like I gotta beat this game. So I was just going through these moments. Like you said, Dylan, like with the Troll King, I was just starting to just murder goblins and I'm like, well I could restart and try and do this, but because of the Ilsa armor, you have like 0 stealth stats. So then in that moment I just kinda had an internal decision. I'm like, okay, I know there's a stealth and like a non-lethal-ish sort of way you go with this game. That's not this playthrough. I am fucking murdering everyone going through it, just tanking everything. There is like quite a few moments that obviously, like when I was hinting to earlier with like the final sequence, I was very much struggling on. So huge credit to you guys that beat it by the honorably. I don't even remember. Maybe I'll boot it up while we're talking.
Because I think level cap is 10 in this game, which is interesting. I can't think of many RPGs that have that low cap. But I was 8 or 9 by the end of it.
I'm not sure either. I might have.
Not that you would get less XP by fucking people with the Ilcid armor, but
you don't feel the struggle at least. I'd like kill a bunch of people, like get this like vault room that has like weapons in it. I'm like, oh, that's kind of basic. Whatever. Like I guess I don't need that stuff.
Yeah, because I guess for me, I was like. As I was getting through the game and I was maybe level 4 or 5, I was starting to realize, and especially as I was maybe using the walkthrough a bit, and it's like, okay, magic is incredibly strong in this game. So essentially, the back half of levels, I just put everything into magic. And I think that's why I made, for me, at the end of the game, I was doing some cheesing still, but like the final boss, for example, I actually didn't like struggle with that much. I think I had to do it 2 times. Like I died like the first or maybe 2 times, and the third time I was able to beat him. But yeah, like I think my stats were pretty well spec'd out at that point where I was able to just use some spells very effectively.
Yeah, I was curious. I guess, Kirkland, because you were able to put all that stuff on from the get-go, you had like stacked strength. Like from I never had enough to equip any of those weapons or equip any of that armor.
Yeah.
Like, even at the end of the game, I couldn't equip the Eelset armor at all.
So I guess you had to make like the meteor like dagger or whatever it was. Like
I made the dagger and then or like the one-handed sword, and then I was in the same boat as you, Dylan. I like stacked into magic stuff. So like I didn't have as easy of a time as you, it sounds like, because I was also getting one shot by everything, so it was really frustrating. So I was like
the Ilcid's part was difficult, but the final boss wasn't too bad.
Even in the final boss, like it was just. And what magic attack did you use? Because I kept using the like fireball. That was like my go-to for the rest of the game. Like the second I was able to do that, that was the only thing I touched pretty much.
Right. I was using that and the harm spell, which was a big thing in the guide I was looking at. This guy's like, oh, use the harm spell and you'll just instantly win. And I'm like, it's never that easy for me, but this thing is pretty helpful. It's tricky, though, because you need to be like the AoE on it's like essentially just a damage over time, but it's only like immediately around your character. So you still have to be able to dodge, or I think more than that, just get lucky in terms of not getting hit by the opponent necessarily.
Yeah, I use that as well. It's like that. It creates those rings around you.
Yeah, and you can.
I like that one a lot.
Did you realize you can like stack it? That's the thing too.
Oh no!
You can pop it 3 times and have 3 harms on and just go fucking ham in terms of damage. So that
3
helps
harms
as well.
And then turn your speed, turn the speed thing on, and then just like play Sonic, I guess at that point.
Yeah, you pretty much turn into an Ilcid. I had a lot of fun running away from the Ilcids, and when they had their super speed and I had mine like preloaded, and then I'd click that. I'm like, oh, you can't catch me, and I'd run behind some rock that they would get cheesed on, and then I'd win the fight that way.
The combos that come out of using the magic in this game are pretty cool.
Yeah.
Like you can spec into having like that speed up works really well with melee builds. It seems like too. So like there's just a lot of like just opportunities to create whatever you want this game to be, which I thought was like really interesting. Because I can't think of a ton of RPGs that gave you that kind of seniority, like to just do whatever you want.
Well, I mean, there's like at least 45 to 50 spells in this game. Like that's a lot.
It's a lot.
That's a ton of different spells. And I guess as a quick explainer for people who are maybe listening, but haven't played the game, essentially you're collecting these runes throughout the game that you don't actually know what they mean, but it'll be like, as I was joking, or like or grumble, or like just random words like this that essentially mean like, one of them might mean like fire. So if you use that, it will create like a fireball, or you can light a torch or something. But then if you do like the precursor word like big fire, of course I'm making it up, it's like something like this, you'd get like a stronger fireball and stuff like that. And so you can kind of connect these different words in different ways. And I found that I wasn't really able to discover any by doing that, but it was still interesting that there's like a lore reason for why what you're doing is working. Like I found that part of it pretty compelling. But yeah, you get like 10 pages in the magic book. Each of them has 4 spells on it, and then there's like a abundance of like hidden spells as well. So that's why I don't know where the final number sits, but like quite a few spells. And I found the precasting system to be like very confusing too, just mostly because of the button prompt of it. But you can like essentially precast up to 3 spells, and that's essentially what a scroll does, right? Is essentially putting something in your precast. So that was like really nice when I was doing the Illicid Bunker at the end to precast speed and then like a harm spell, maybe a heal as well. I think that was actually what I was using a lot in the final fight, Dante against the boss. It was just a lot of like healing. I was just like healing through a lot of the stuff and then just continuing to strike with the meteor sword, and that's eventually, it was like a long fight, don't get me wrong, but I was just essentially like Dark Souls, like, you know, like strafing behind him constantly and just striking and whatnot. But yeah, that magic system is so interesting. Whenever I found a rune, I found that was a very exciting thing of like, oh, what spells did I unlock? And when I finally got enough money to buy one from a shopkeeper, like that was a pretty exciting thing. So I like that rather than finding individual spells or tomes, you're just finding these like essentially root words that connect with other things and maybe give you a stronger version of a spell you already have, or just something new that you never even thought conceivable. And there's like, you know, telekinesis and levitation and healing.
Levitation
and
is
warding.
awesome.
Yeah, there is so many types of spells. I just found that system completely amazing.
And that was something that. Oh,
sorry. Go ahead.
I was just saying, like early on when I'm repping my Illicid armor, got my meteor saber, and I know I'm cheesing the game. I feel the dirt on me while I'm progressing through it, and I'm just like, I think it was not quite halfway through the game, but a good amount, and I realized that like I was really not even scratching the surface on like the magic or like what you could really do with it. I feel like most of the time when I play these games, my initial playthrough is the more stealthy route, but because I'm just repping this like super male armor, I was just like, no, I'm going through it this way. And then I kind of like semi regretted it by the end because I just didn't really get to fully use these systems that were in place. So that's something that like on another playthrough I'll completely shift like my I guess the way I play there.
Well,
and
I think
try to
when you
do
don't-
something non-lethal.
Exactly. When you don't feel the need to like, okay, I got to beat this game so that we can record this podcast. I feel like that's actually a good way to do it, is just play through the game once, engaging with like guides and cheesing things and whatnot, just to like figure out what this game's about and learn it, because it is so complex and the tutorialization is not great either, right? So I think it's a good way to go through and just get a lay of the land, and then when you play in the game, if you go back and play the game in the future, just without the time crunch on it, just enjoy the game and try and push it and see what kind of things you can do, because I found a lot of experimentation in this game seemed to work, which is of course a very Arkane thing to do. Just try this crazy out of the box thing, and they've probably accounted for it, and boom, they have like some funny line of dialogue you'll get for doing this thing that you thought you were so clever for coming up with. Like they've thought of it first, and in a good way.
I'm very curious if you can take the like no spells used playthrough approach, because there are some parts of this game where I'm like, I at least felt like I needed to use a scroll.
Right.
I'm just curious. Like,
yeah, that final boss would be, I guess if you just had, 100 health potions in your pocket, I don't see why you
or like
couldn't.
getting to the dragon. Do you have to get that sword, right? Like, do you have to be able to enchant that sword? But the only way I know how to get to the dragon was to use levitate, right? So
right,
I didn't know how to get to him.
Yeah, I couldn't figure out how to get over that one jump. I tried it many times, but I couldn't figure out how to do that without that spell as well.
Definitely curious.
Let's talk about this a bit. So this is something that I think is very, very poor in the game, is just the controls of certain things, like just the way you're engaging with your inventory or things in the world, where sometimes you'll have to double click, sometimes it's a single click, sometimes it's like you're hitting enter or shift and clicking, or clicking on an object in the real world. I found it so confusing, just a total mess at times. And sometimes if you like double click on your inventory, something in your inventory, it'll like highlight what objects you can interact with. But it was something that they definitely needed to work on. I think it was just because they had so many mechanics in this game that it was almost like, okay, these designers are working on this mechanic, these designers are working on another one, and they didn't really think how they would interact or something like that. And so it just became a bit of a mess on the control side of things. And that's why I'm so curious how this game plays with a controller back on Xbox in the day. Like, that just seems kind of crazy. And just other things too, like I could not understand the stealth mechanic, right? Because it's confusing. Most games have it so that you walk, and then if you crouch, you are in stealth mode, right? But in this game, you have a crouch, which is separate from stealth mode. But then stealth mode, for most of the game for me, I was like, I'm just walking like normally. What's going on? But it's not until you like either spec out the like stealth stats or put on stealth armor, and then the stealth button actually makes your character move slower. So you're actually like probably going to successfully be in stealth. But it's very confusing to me that if you just don't have that certain gear on, the stealth button is literally doing nothing. Or like maybe it's factored in your stats and you're a little bit more harder to spot. But like that is very, very unclear. It never really made sense until like the last maybe 4 or 5 hours. I was like, okay, I finally get what's going on here. But it's very unintuitive that crouch isn't necessarily giving you more stealth.
Yeah, I feel like I was just using crouch and hoping for the best. I don't know that I ever properly went into stealth this entire game, if that's the case. Like I had a lot of situations, especially in that like early goblin area when I was like trying to go into their little, like there's that room that has a bunch of chests in it and there's like a guard right outside of it. And it's like maybe it's like right across from where the throne room is. I was having the guard come through the door that he definitely couldn't see me because there was a door in the way every single time. And I was literally just like quick saving and like crouching and hoping that I would like just path the right way to make sure that he didn't trigger.
Dante, the solution is simple. You have to kill him.
Right there you go. Definitely awkward mechanic though, for sure. I wish that one was a little bit more clear. I think that's kind of the whole game. I wish a lot of things were a little more clear.
Yeah.
It was very cool to be able to figure stuff out on your own. But every once in a while, I would be like, come on, I feel like this should work. Why isn't this working?
There's even things like, for example, early on in the game in the kind of still tutorial zone, you have to like put a rope on a gear to like use a lift thing. And it's like, I never use that again. That's so weird. Like, where does that appear? I'm sure it's somewhere in the game, but it's so interesting that they spent the time to teach you how to like, I guess they were doing that so you could learn to click on something in your inventory and then click on something in the world, but like they never really used that exact thing again. I was keeping rope sometimes. I'm like, is it worth having this in my inventory? It's kind of a chunky item, but ultimately it was like, no, I'd never really needed a rope ever again in this game.
I really wish I had dropped some of those ropes along the way and not those damn stones.
Yeah.
Spacey with the ropes because I was like, I don't have room for this, but I'm gonna need these ropes one day. That's for sure.
I don't know.
Used rope again, and I definitely needed those damn rocks.
Dante, I don't know what it was about those rocks, but when I got 2 of them my first time through the Temple of Akba, and I just put them in my room. I'm like, I don't know what these are for.
Nice lamps.
But yeah, they look kind of cool. I'm just putting them in my bedroom. And so thankfully later on, it was like, oh, I guess I was I was using the guide and it's like, you need these things. I'm like, I don't know how I would have known that I need these rocks again. But thankfully I already have 2 of them. And then the third one's back in the Temple of Akba still. So that does sound very frustrating though, especially that there's no prompt or anything that's like, keep this or has some importance.
These are going to be important one day.
Yeah, that's very, very weird.
The fact that you can sell them is crazy.
Yeah. They should give you like $0. So you're like, well,
they give you 3 cents. And I was like, whatever, get out of here.
You were like, I
could
use
the money. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Sorry, I'm going to bring this up until we actually talk about the end. I'm going to just keep peppering it in here because I'm bitter.
No, I don't blame you.
It's good.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the characters here. First, one thing I really want to shout out is this is going to be a recurring thing in the Arkane Retro is great writing, but I also just love the names they come up with. Like Dishonored has a bunch of great ones like Karnaka, Dunwall, Emily Caldwin, Corvo Ton, like just some really great writing on the names, or like, Updom in Deathloop. I always love that name. But I think one of my favorite all-time Arkane names now is what my name is alluding to is Fallon Orboplanix. I just love that last name so much. And it's such a fitting name for an astronomer too, Orboplanix, for whatever reason. But the funniest part about that is that whenever someone, because it's a plot point early on in the game is you're trying to figure out who murdered Fallon Orboplanix, but everyone always says his full name, right? They never say just Fallon or Fallon, or whereas the astronomer, they always say Fallon Oroplanix has been taken. And like, it's so dramatic every time. And I think there's some okay voice acting in this game, but the main, like the player character's voice acting, one of the worst performances I have ever seen in a video game, in anything ever. It is so just like reading off, like it sounds like maybe one of the level designers was just like, you know, phoning in this performance, because it's just, there's never any nuance to the performance. The tone is all over the place, and he's just, there's like even spacing between each word, right? Like he's just reading off a script without any sort of nuance. It was very funny to me that there's some decent voice actors in here, but for the main actor, no, just horrible.
There's like no commas too when he talks.
Yeah.
It's just like all like one like run along sentence. It made me laugh just with how like ridiculous it was sometimes. Because yeah, like you said, like there is some great voice actors, but it'd be like who you're like talking to. They're like speaking like with some great tone and like really getting into the character, and then it goes back to Amshagar. He just sounds like such like an average white dude. It's so weird.
Yeah. Maybe alongside his amnesia, he forgot how to have a conversation with people as well.
Yeah, I did like his name. I like the name Amshagar, and the meaning is like guy with no name or whatever it was too that guy gives you. But yeah, I love the voice acting of the snake women specifically.
And Kosh, they have some wild names too.
Yeah, Sister Silash or something like that. Like just kind of weird names. But it was this era of creepiness to it, especially when you go to their home base, right? And the music that plays there is like you feel like you're gonna get jump scared at any point. Like these guys are just gonna attack you, and at no point do they. Like they are friendly. They just have a funny voice, and the music is very unsettling. But I also love the goblin voice actor, like Pulseus and stuff. I thought was a lot of fun. The trolls, like I really liked all the voice acting pretty much, except for our main guy.
The banter too, like between goblins or trolls, like amongst each other. I was just laughing, like just walking along, and they're just like you hear some like I don't know, just shit talking amongst each other, or like just jokes. Like one was about like gray goblins, and it's like what do you call like mothers of gray goblins or something? And it was like some really like bottom barrel humor, but it just made me laugh so hard because I wasn't expecting it at all. And I feel like a lot of the conversations too, just like in Arx, I found interesting, and I wasn't really engaging with them. I was just going to a destination. But yeah, it was some good lines.
They definitely characterize unnecessarily sometimes, like the like banker's wife just being this like gold digger, and like there's like all these just
the way
like,
she
random...
walks is like so exaggerated, just popping out all of her body parts.
Too much swagger within her. She can't handle it all. No, there's just like they I forget the name of the like the head cop. I forget his name. Sort of the C. But I'm forgetting his name.
The king or who or
no. He's like one of the main the guards like that you work with.
Like the councilman guy, whatever. Yeah.
But just like they do give all of these characters like way more flavor than they necessarily had to, because they could have just used these people as like people to get you from point A to point B, and that's it. Like that's all they had to say is go here. But like these guys all have like personality, which is once again like I don't feel like there was an opportunity for a lot of that back then. The early 2000s, thinking of like
especially like in the comparison to Morrowind, where there is like voice acting in that game, but it's more just like characters will have a quip like hello Outlander, like little thing like that, but then like the actual in the dialogue they aren't voice acted for that part of it. So I guess for me is like the fact that they went this far and actually had voice acting for this thing was even kind of impressive in its own right.
Totally.
That they went that far, even if like literally every goblin has the exact same voice actor, you know, like there's not like nuance in that way, but at least for the main characters, even if they are playing multiple characters, you feel like it's a pretty distinct performance, whether it's because like on the sisters they're having some really weird intonation or throwing some effects on there or something like that. But it was something I really appreciated. Yeah,
it just sounds like they had a lot of fun when they were producing these characters. Like, you know, this was like the development team doing all of these voices, right? Like this was it definitely wasn't like bringing in a big cast. Like Jeff from accounting was the goblin, right? Like
and when I look at like some of the I looked at a couple of the IMDb pages for like Shani, like who's the king's daughter, who you find the leader of the resistance camp, whatever they're called. And like, yeah, it didn't really have like a booming career by any means, you know, like she did some other stuff, but it's interesting to have these kind of just unfamiliar kind of voices and stuff like that.
I meant to double check it too, because there's one particular character who wasn't in it much. He was in it pretty early on, but he just was such an iconic voice from like Elder Scrolls, I believe. Like specifically Skyrim. I remember him playing, of course, like probably 20 different characters in that. But it was just like the particular voice. I'll have to look into it when you guys talk. But yeah, I like heard it and I was like, oh my god, that's this character from the Thieves Guild or something. Yeah.
He's just alive in these fantasy worlds. I like that the start of this game, for me, actually feels a lot like Oblivion, right? Where you're breaking out of this prison and then you're going through this cave that has rats in it. Like, there's a lot of similarities there, which obviously this game came out before Oblivion, and Morrowind's intro is a lot quicker, but it still is that setting of you are a prisoner. Skyrim kind of had that too. It's just like it's a big thing that Elder Scrolls likes to do. I thought it was interesting that this game had a similar thing. One of my favorite areas, if we want to break it down to it's hard to determine what exactly is a level in this game, right? Because there's 8 layers, and then each one of those are pretty expansive. But one of the sections I really liked was going through the crypt, which in the first layer or two, which first of all, it's like a thing you're seeing early on in Arx, and the door is locked, so you can't go in there. And so you're kind of thinking about it in the back of your head. At some point in the game, I want to go there and check it out. And the first couple layers are pretty standard in terms of what you'd expect for a crypt-like level in a game. Like, even once again, Elder Scrolls has similar things to this as well, where there's some monsters and stuff like that. But then I really like the deeper layers of that thing, where it was just loaded up with traps. There's traps on the ground, there's buttons on the walls and doors that lock behind you and all this stuff. Because I thought one of the very interesting parts about this game is so many games like a Fallout and Elder Scrolls and stuff have like a perception stat, right? And it's always kind of implied what that does, and it like funnels into different skills and stuff, but it never really feels like a perception stat. But in this game, you have the intuition stat, which just makes it easier or harder to detect traps in like a very rudimentary way, where it's like the ground will be like darker and it's like more obvious that there's a trap there.
Sometimes it goes further too. Like, they'll start to highlight them red.
Okay, if you have a really high stat, maybe it like becomes even more visible in that way.
Yeah,
but I even noticed it.
Highlight them.
I noticed that just in my playtime, and as I was leveling up and putting some stats into that, at first I had no idea what the intuition stat actually meant. It's like it says like it makes it easier to discover these things. I'm like, well, what does that even really mean? But eventually, when your stat's high enough, you're like, oh yeah, I can actually spot that this part of the wall is a different color, so it must be like a hidden door. And then lo and behold, you look for a hidden switch, and it does open that door. So I thought that was particularly interesting. But I really loved that crypt.
The crypt
I thought it was like scary in its own way, right? Because there's zombies and they're reanimating and stuff, so you feel this like you need to rush through this thing. But if you rush through it, there's like a spike trap right around the corner, and then eventually you get down in that room where there's kind of like this feast that happened, hundreds of years ago or something like that. Or maybe not a feast, but there's like a big table or whatever it was, and then like that puzzle at the end of that thing too, where you go and there's like this huge room that has like all these shapes and stuff on the ground, and that was one of the few like obscure puzzles that I was able to figure out by like just on a notepad. I was tracking down all this different information, and I felt really good when I finally figured that out. So, and it just has like a bunch of little like mini escape rooms in it. There's a lot of great loot in there. So that was like one of my favorite individual levels in the game, was going through that crypt. And even researching after, I know that crypt apparently goes down all 8 levels. Like, it goes down to the very bottom of this thing, and in that quest you only need to go to like layer 2 or 3 or something like that. But the fact that it keeps going is pretty interesting too, and something that on a future playthrough as I want to go through there. But really, really love that sequence of the game.
There's a really cool helmet when you go through that entire piece of the crypt. I think the crypt is the best part of the game. Like, I would put that as like
that's cool. I'm glad that you felt that way as well. I didn't know how you guys would feel,
because like handling the like zombies is really interesting, because you can like carry stakes along with you, and if they die, you can
that was an interesting mechanic
and keep them from respawning. There's all these like crypts that are like slightly broken, and you can like chisel away at them and get all of this like secret loot. You can handle like a lot of the traps in different ways. Once again, like this levitation is like really cool there. Or you can go through and like find switches to allow you to like go over these like pit traps that will like pave like a way to walk past those or walk over them, or you can just float across. But yeah, if you continue down that like side quest that allows you to keep going down the crypt, there's a helmet that straight up shows you it pretty much puts you at max perception.
Interesting.
So you can see like any like hidden traps or anything like that in the game going forward.
And so when they're highlighted red, as you were mentioning.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so go down there.
Yeah, the crypt is sick. I think that has like the most densely the most dense setting in the entire game of like, here are a bunch of puzzles to deal with. Here's like really interesting combat mechanics to deal with. Like, I feel like they pull everything that the game is already doing right and just put it in this one zone. And it's near like, it's like the late middle era of the game too. So I think it does kind of like land right at the perfect spot too, because like you're learning a lot of the mechanics along the way, and it's like, here's an opportunity to just like play with all of this stuff here at once now. Yeah, I really dug that section.
Yeah, it was so terrifying too. Just like the voice lines of the mummies.
Yeah.
It was like, join us, or like whatever it was. Like just hearing that, man, I was like already on edge just because like the overall environment's so scary, and then just playing late at night. I think it was last Saturday I played till the wee hours, and that was of course the part that I was at, and I was just really trying to power through it. But man, yeah, I was so on edge, especially like you guys were mentioning the traps. You know, by that point I'm just still rocking my Eelsid armor. Hit one trap, just hits me dead on the chest, brings me like half health. I'm like, okay, that's okay. You have some life potions or whatever. Go to the next one, just like get hit right again. I'm like, fuck, I'm losing these life potions, and then just kept getting I just could not avoid these traps for the longest part. And then I ended up using all my life potions I had, quick saved, and then like went through and just got hit again. I'm like, okay, no, I'm actually focusing here. And then yeah, I tried my best to avoid them. I definitely had to save scum a little bit because I just kept getting murked by them. But also just like I had like 0 perception stat or anything, so I was not seeing them coming by any means. But yeah, I really liked like using like the pickaxe to go through the crypts and just finding like loot and stuff like that. So yeah, I found that section of the game to be definitely top notch for sure. I don't know if it was my favorite. There was a couple other ones that were just, they seem so different from what the rest of like the flavor of the game was. Maybe it was like the snake lady's place where it just seemed like you're on like a spaceship at periods.
That is a really cool section too. Like
let's take our second ad break here and we'll get back and we'll talk about that section of the game. Okay, we're back. Take it away. Snake Place and the Temple Illusions. Let's talk about that whole area.
Yeah, so like just some of like the doorways and everything, like it just felt like I was on like an alien spaceship, and it was one of those moments where I just kind of had to like remind myself, like, man, like this is the same game that I was out with like the crypt location that you guys were talking about, or like the Temple of Akba, like just the different areas that we were going. Like we're still underground in this underground civilization place, but it was just like I was surprised by like some of the. I think not so much like the locations we were at, but just like the aesthetic. Like it was switching so much throughout the game, and I was really digging it.
It reminds me a lot of Halo. That area.
Like Covenant ship.
I don't
That's
know
exactly
why. Yeah, like a ton. And I was like, what is this place? And I bumped up against that area so many times, and the ladies like through the barrier, just like, we don't want you here yet. Back later. Like I kept coming back. I'm like, eventually this lady's gonna let me in here. And they give you a firm invitation when you're allowed to come through. But I definitely like bumped up against that wall a few times. That section has my favorite puzzle in the entire game as well. I think that has some they did a really cool job of like making all of those different kind of I think there's parts of these games or this game that has like the crypt, the Temple of Illusion, and then the Eelsid like area near the end. All have the bunker like have really feel much more contained than other parts of the game where you're just like moving through these huge caverns. These feel like, okay, we've crafted essentially like these puzzles within these environments, and I think the Temple Illusion I think that's what it's called, had my favorite puzzle in the entire game, where you're trying to collect these like snake idols.
Yes.
There's two really cool moments in that where you have one of them you're trying to pick up and it's under this. You're trying to pick up one of those idols and it's under this cage, and there's 6 switches around the room, and you can go up and click on this orb and it shows you which switch you're supposed to click, but they all look exactly the same. So you can drop an item in each of these rooms, and you drop a different item in each of the rooms, and when you click on the orb and it shows you which one to click, you'll see the item you dropped in there.
That's smart,
So-
dude. You're so smart. Your brain is so big.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I felt like there are a few moments in this game where I was like, holy shit, that is like a genius mechanic. Like, how did you guys put this together? And that felt like you feel like $1 million coming out of that room. Like it definitely took. I was sitting in there like, what the fuck am I supposed to do? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And then eventually I just started like throwing pickaxes around, and I had a sword sitting in one room and like armor sitting in one room, and then you just get to go click, 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 and it lifts the thing up and you get to go. And then the other one is when you kept walking through this tunnel, and it keeps like refreshing you backwards.
Yeah.
And then you eventually turn around and walk through the room backwards, and it allows you to go through the tunnel. I just thought some of that stuff was like super slick and really interesting.
Yeah, unfortunately, that sequence I wasn't able to do fully without a walkthrough. There's a couple moments where I could not figure it out. And that one you're talking about with the switches, I spent so much time in there when I was like, okay, this room, there's like a scratch on the wall. There's like pixels here that stand out, or like this room has like is darker, is like shadows coming through. And I spent a lot of time, and I think I actually ended up getting close. When I looked at the walkthrough, I was like, I think I just had 2 that were in the wrong order. But that is really smart that you were able to figure that out by just dropping some items down.
If it makes you feel any better, that's the wrong idol anyway. Like, that's the false one, and it doesn't even get you through the mission. Like, you have to get like the real one.
Right.
And yeah, apparently that one isn't even like the one you're supposed to be using. So you can waste a shit ton of time in there, and it's useless.
I did like that sequence though. In general, I thought it was really cool, like especially because there's a couple moments where you see that guy, like he's it's a very horror movie thing where he just walks around the corner. It's fucking creepy because he's like naked. It's like, who is this guy? And you see him a couple times. I really like that sequence when there's like 2 hallways going down. One is like, they're both like, it's all Temple of Illusion stuff. So one's like an extra small hallway when you actually walk up to it, just playing with your perception. I thought that sequence was really fun. I think for me, a bit of the frustration came in that I found that fight at the end against the 2 sisters so difficult. The only way I could get it is by one of them would like cheese kill the other one, and then I just had to like out survive. But the thing is, I had saved so much in the temple that I don't think I could leave at that point, and I didn't really want to. I was like, I really want to stick through and fight this, but I didn't have the gear necessary to fight them. So it took me a lot of attempts to be able to beat them. I found that was a very difficult fight. So it was a bit frustrating, but overall, I thought that sequence was really cool. Like this is just a puzzle sequence of the game, all based around this intuition stat. Just these really weird puzzles, and I like that this game has a lot of puzzles on top of like combat dungeons as well. There is a lot of these puzzles in there as well.
Yeah, it felt so fitting too to have like the Temple of Illusions, and you're doing these trials and trying to solve these puzzles. Unfortunately, I was pretty guide heavy at this point of the game. I was referencing that a lot. I tried a little, but again, it was like under 5 minutes, I think, of my own attempts on that puzzle one. So definitely good on you, Dante.
Because I guess this is worth mentioning too. That there's not a lot of info about this game online. Like the wiki page is a fucking wasteland. There's like barely anything there. So I could really only find like 2 prominent guides. There's like the IGN one, and there was like a Steam forums one. Which were you guys using one in particular?
I used the Steam one a lot.
Interesting.
Yeah, I actually found that to be super useful.
I had the Steam one, and then I had I found like a YouTube walkthrough, so I would just like go to a particular part that the character was at, and then like
there was a
see
couple
how
moments
he would
where
do
I
it.
was going through like someone's Let's Play and like trying to find the exact moment that I was on, but then they had like all these different spells and all these different things that I have. Like, this is not going to work, but I love that IGN one, and it was one of those like old school like game FAQs kind of guides, right? And the way it's written, and it's got like the text with like brackets and stuff.
I'm pretty sure that is just like a Game Facts one that they like.
It's definitely not like it's
owned by the same company.
Oh, okay.
It's like do a little.
We got some some interference. Okay. Dante, are you back?
Oh, was it me? Was it me? Yeah, I'm back.
I think, I don't know, whoever it was. I think we're back now. But yeah, no, I didn't realize that was owned by the same company. But it's funny because it's like if you go to like a modern IGN review, it's like nothing like that in terms of the format of it, right? Like it's very modernized and they have pictures all over the place, but obviously this is not one they've gone back and like retroactively made a better guide for. But I love that guide, and I like the character of it too. Like you could tell there's a lot of personality to the guy who was writing it, where he was like kind of writing more than just like how to beat this thing. He was sharing his experience and like different tactics, and it was kind of just a funny guide. So I like that. There was very little of this info online, but it's funny that we all three of us kind of went to the same resources to try and figure some of this stuff out.
That like style of guides too, it just takes me back. I remember going on, it was like the website before Games Radar, whatever it was called. It was like a cheat codes website, and that's where I would go on like my Legend of Zelda guides. And like you said, Dylan, it was all written like the same, just like plain text with like brackets and everything. And yeah, good times back when there was no resources to like beat games, and they had terrible tutorials. So you had to do stuff like that.
Vividly remember a good like 5 years of my life using more paper than I've ever used ever, like because my games were my gaming systems were in a different room, so I would go to my computer and print out like 500-page walkthroughs and like carry them up, and then my mom would be like livid because paper and ink was like incredibly expensive, and I had no concept. Glad we've come a long way.
Some other areas of the game, I really like the design of the city of Arx, and it becomes kind of your safe haven. I love that you get your own room, and I don't know about you guys, but every time I left, I would lock the door, and I would
lock the door. Yeah,
you can lock doors too if you have the same key. Also, that something about the crypt. Holy shit, the amount of keys you have in that.
I just wanted to talk about the keys. You brought up like I had like a moment, like I had a flashback of like a whole inventory list of keys, and then every single time I got to a door, because there's no real naming conventions on the keys, I'm clicking every single key.
Yeah.
Like I went through 30
I really wish you could add tags to keys.
Door.
Just write like even you could write your own description of like what a key did. That was a point of frustration, particularly in that one point in the game.
Terrible.
And like of course I didn't like organize them properly, so they'd just be like scattered all over my inventory. So I'm like, I just check every key, and then of course there's like one miscellaneous one in the bottom right, and like they don't even really have names. It's just like an intricate key.
Iron key.
So annoyed. Going
there's like
three different
sprites they can have, so it's like there's not even much differentiation between the keys that do exist.
And at first, of course, initially when I'm like exposed to the system, I'm like, this is really immersive. It's cool. I have to check every key. And then by like the third door, I'm so done with this system. I'm like, just give me a master key so I can access every door with it.
And if only the lock picking was easier or something I don't even understand truly. Like I don't know what I'm missing there. I'm guessing it's just a stat thing.
Yeah, I think
so. Maybe that would be in another playthrough. I'll definitely try that out because I had so many of those things, and I tried them. I always kept a couple of those lock picking kits in my inventory, but they were pretty much always worthless. But in my room in my room back in Arx, I had just had like 100 keys on the ground by the end of the game because I didn't want to get rid of any keys. You never know when I'll need it again, so I just threw them on the ground. And so I would always keep my key to my room, and I would lock the door every time I left. I don't know why. I didn't think anyone would go and steal my stuff, but I don't know. Just like I just liked doing that, and so it made it particularly creepy when there's a couple moments in the game when you'll find like a dead chicken on the ground.
Yeah,
and, like,
I was curious
on the wall, and that happened in my room after I locked the door. So I'm like, something really spooky is going on here. If they were able to go through my locked door, or they locked my door on the way out, so that's so kind of them. But how did they do it without the key? So I was like, this is something supernatural, or that was something where I was wondering, is there an element of this game that's going on like in your head, or you're in a simulation or something weird like that, right? Because I'm like, how is that possible? So I don't know if that's just like an oversight that they didn't think about, but I guess I still don't have the answer to this day. Who exactly writing on the wall? Do you guys have a theory, or do you discover more about that?
The Eelsids they hate you, don't they? They're like trying to get you at that point,
right? But like, how do they? I
don't understand how they got through your door and then also locked it on the way out. But I think that's an oversight for sure, because I don't think they assumed anybody was locking their door on the way out.
Yeah.
I trusted the king and his people to not go in my business. And they were good until that chicken.
Yeah. I needed more chests in my room, though. 2 was not enough. I had so much stuff on the ground. I had like at least 20 scrolls at any given time, weapons all over the place. All the chests were full. I was like, this armor, I might need it again. Threw it on. My bed had stuff all over it. It was just a total mess in there.
Messy.
But I made it my own. Could never get rid of that blood on the wall. That was like, well, I guess I always got this dank smell going on in the background. A couple other areas. One that I really enjoyed, though it was a bit difficult as well, was the Dwarven Kingdom. This is like a later area in the game that you're going through. But just, first of all, the kind of horror element of it, where there's just the squashed beast or the soon-to-be squashed beast that's chasing you around, who's very, very powerful. But also just like the dead dwarves everywhere, and there's clearly a place that's been destroyed. Which, once again, I found it funny that in Elder Scrolls, that's a thing. Like, what happened to the dwarves? The disappearance of the dwarves is like a big thing with the lore. So I thought it was interesting. By the time that your character's walking around in Arx, the dwarves are gone at this point. So I don't know why that's a reoccurring theme in these fantasy games of the early 2000s, but it seems to be a thing that comes up again and again.
I got there really early.
Oh, interesting.
I was just running around,
Exploring.
going up and down levels. Yeah, and I got to that beast area super early, and he's there. And screwed me for so long. I definitely like F5'd a few too many times, and I was like, I'm trapped here until I solve this puzzle.
That's rough.
I think you just do get trapped down there, actually. There's no way to escape until you deal with him.
I think so. I mean, maybe there's some way with a certain spell or something, but yeah. Or if
because he breaks down walls, they actually like crumble behind him and stuff like that. So that was like I feel like one of the more frustrating parts for me. I thought once I figured it out, it was really cool, but like there's so many moments where I was like letting him come in the room with me and then like hopping over stuff and hoping that he wouldn't like path properly, and then I would like get like halfway down the hallway and he would still get me because he was faster than you, and I didn't have the speed spell at that point because I was like I said, I was probably like level 8 or something. It was like way too early.
Well, level 8's pretty late in the game, but
no, wait, not like
level okay. I thought okay, like not character level 8.
Wait,
death level.
No, yeah, character level 8. Isn't that early? Like
I think 10 is
like
the
level
cap.
20? Oh, you said 10 is the cap. Sorry.
Yeah.
Maybe I was like 4 or something. I was definitely early in the game. And yeah, I just found that part to be like truly difficult. I had to look that one up. That was one of the few times I was like, I don't know what to do. I'm getting killed over and over and over again. And then once I realized that you can like use these ribs to lure him around and make him stay in spots, that was like eye-opening because I was not using anything in my inventory.
Well, even the button to do that is like obscured behind this machine. Like, it is so hard to find that there's even something there that you could potentially interact with, and then the fact to know which item you have to use to do it, on top of the fact that you're being chased by a thing that will insta-kill you. Like, it's a lot to deal with. So
a little stressful.
I too found it pretty difficult. But I really like, I mean, so I guess when you went there, you didn't really do any of the weapon building. You just like escaped and then came back to do the weapon building.
Yep. Yeah, I was like,
because you wouldn't have had all the equipment, I guess. I can't remember.
I don't
Most
think
of it's there.
You
wouldn't have been able to enchant the weapon, but you could have at least built the weapons, I guess.
Yeah, I didn't even do that. I didn't understand the purpose of being there. I was trying to use the smelter for a little bit. I had found the casts, and I didn't understand that you were supposed to use the big mithril piece, and you're supposed to smash the mithril piece. I was just using like random metals I had found, and I was chucking them in here, and I was like, this shit's not working. I killed this beast, I'm leaving. And then finally I was like, oh, now I have a reason to be here, and like all these like things started to click into place, and I was like, oh, okay, I definitely did this like 10 hours too early. But I guess it's like that's a cool thing as well, that they allow you to kind of like bounce around pretty openly for most of the game. Once you kind of clear out that initial goblin area, it's kind of go wherever the hell you want, and you can really get yourself into some trouble. But I don't know, it's kind of part of the fun.
Thankfully, there's a teleporter like right by the dwarven base too.
I didn't have that yet.
Okay, you didn't get it yet.
Nope, I didn't have fast travel yet either. Right. So that was pretty brutal. Once you get the fast travel in that game, I think this actually like bumped up like quite a few points for me, because I was doing all this traveling without the fast travel, and I was like, Jesus, like backtracking in this game is brutal. And then you get the fast travel and you're like, oh, this is a breeze. And it's also early fast travel mechanic, like pretty huge. I think I can't remember a fast travel like that in mini games. Yeah,
kind of limited to these specific, one on each floor kind of thing. I thought it was a pretty cool system. I liked the way it was used. What else was that? I was gonna so I really liked the element of like building this ultimate weapon in the story. I love that there was all these different machines, and it was kind of confusing, but you had to like go mine the correct mithril, and then you have to send it through this teleporter, take it over this thing and smash it, and then put it in the smelter. Like all these steps to it, which once again difficult to do without a guide to know how to do all these steps. But that was such an interesting mechanic. Like I feel like they went way harder than they needed to. Most games you would just like find an ultimate weapon in a chest after you clear out this cave, but instead they made it this whole thing where you take on the role of a dwarf, and by like following their instructions too. So some of the steps I was able to figure out because you're like you have a tutorial in the game essentially that the dwarves have wrote of how to activate this thing. So I really liked that sequence. I thought it was very interesting, albeit difficult, but it was really cool.
Yeah, no, I liked it a lot too. I found it funny though, because they're like amp me up for this ultimate weapon, and like, oh, what's this ultimate weapon gonna be to destroy Akba? And then I go through all, following the guide like you mentioned, Dylan, following it, do it all, and then what appears is like the sword I've had this entire game. I was like, are you kidding me? All that effort? Okay, I get it.
That's
You know, it's my
amazing.
fault. I'm the cheater here. I get it. I am cheesing the game. But I wanted at least a different color or something. It was just like the same hue, same glowing
Did
hue.
you
It
get
was like-
both? Because there's 2 casts you can do. You could have made the sword you didn't have.
yeah, I didn't even cross my mind. Like the one that I was following in the guide, it was just the one that I already had. So I
two-handed
was
one?
yeah, I was following that to the T, and
Nice.
then yeah, it was it was a funny realization. But just the whole setting of the dwarves and their disappearing. You know, I love Elder Scrolls, so I think that was probably why I was like, oh, I love this idea. I wonder why. It's because I've already experienced it before. Also, just like the beast in the depths, that was terrifying the first time I like interacted with it. That was a fun shift, and just I was getting just so many like Lord of the Rings parallels where like you got your mithril, you got your dwarves that dug too deep and too greedily and they encountered this giant creature. So I was very much enjoying that section.
That's amazing. Another kind of prolific area you go through is the Temple of Akba, and I like this section in particular because you have to do it twice. Right, you go through there first time. There's the cultists, and then eventually you'll have to go back through it, and the Ilcids have taken over it. But I like the level design of this area. There's a mixture of like a little bit of stealth you can do, and kind of I guess not critical paths, or you can go up the stairs, and there's like these other rooms going on up there. Lots of collectibles. I like the little sequence where you like kill a bunch of the priests, then you go into the one room and it's like a blind priest, and he's like, "Hey, what's up? Like, how are you?" you just like you just never have to fight him. Even later in the game, when there was like a golem running around that room for me, and I'm fighting this golem, and like this priest is just standing there
He's doing his
thing the whole
chants.
time.
Yeah.
It was so funny. But I thought that golem kind of puzzle was pretty interesting, where you have to you can do it in multiple ways too, I think. But essentially, like getting one of the golem hearts, putting it in one of the golems, getting them to walk over, stand on this one switch, and then there's like that boss fight there. I cheesed it so hard, that weird like Half-Life demon creature thing in that room. He just got like stuck on one of the cages, and I just fired 100 arrows at him. So I felt really great about that. But I really like the Temple of Akba. Yeah,
I did not use a bow this whole game.
Yeah, I didn't
touch
either.
it.
How did it work, Dylan?
Exactly as you'd expect. Actually,
Yeah.
It was not too bad of a system.
Okay.
And I forget what it's either. I think it's like the further away you hit something, the more damage you do. So you're kind of incentivized to try and find long shots, which is hard to do, right? Because you're playing in this labyrinthal cave thing. There's oftentimes like just short little corridors and stuff. So it was pretty cool. I used a lot of it, and I had to refresh my arrows. So I'd go back to the guy in Arx and buy some fresh arrows whenever I was out. Each like bundle quiver has like 100 in it, so you get quite a few uses out of it. But yeah, I used a lot of the bow in the when I finally found it. I ended up using it quite a bit. It was one of my go-to weapons.
Nice.
Any thoughts on Temple of Akbar or any other areas, like levels, areas that you guys want to shout out?
I also thought that
Other than the end of the game?
that little golem puzzle was cool. It took me a while to figure out that you had to close the previous door to get through the next door.
same,
I was in here forever.
same.
I was like, what am I supposed to do? I solved this puzzle, and then I just realized like it's a hallway with a door that you walk through, and then at the end there's the like final door you're supposed to go through, and you're literally just supposed to close the door behind you.
So weird. So
silly.
weird.
Kind of silly. But hey, these were some of these like obtuse moments where I was like, where it does get to the point where it's like, how do you figure that out outside of either just like brute forcing this?
Yeah.
You found whatever random writing there was that you like is potential. You have potential to miss, or you've read a guide.
Yeah, I was having those moments in like the first time I was in the Temple of Akba, and like there would just be like a switch in like a dark room somewhere, and it's not like super obvious to see. So I would be just roaming the hallways trying to figure out what I'm doing, and then I reference the guide, and then it's just a character is walking the same dark hallway as me, and then it's just this like super dark switch that he just goes right to, and I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? There's no reference to this switch. There's no like nameplate on it on what it does. Like there was a lot of just hidden switches like that, or maybe I just had to boost up my brightness or something. But I was frustrated.
Intuition stat. You needed the intuition
Yeah,
stat.
There you go. So I guess if it's a game implemented system, then I can't really shit on them. I just have to.
I don't think the intuition stat helped with that stuff. That was just dark switch in a dark corner.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some of
Didn't
it.
love that.
Yeah. Some of it, no matter how good your stat is probably impossible to figure out.
And the last one I forgot to mention with the dwarf area, because there's like the lava area and like a bunch of platforms at one point that you have to kind of like hop over, I guess, to use like levitation. I wasn't using levitation at that time. I missed my jumps so many times, and I was getting so pissed off in that moment. And like the game doesn't have like a lot of parkour elements to it, so I feel like just this random section of hopping over these objects, I was very much getting frustrated on. But if I just invested in some levitation early on, I definitely could have used that.
That's worth shouting out that the jump in this game sucks, right? Where you have to have a running start, and then you have like no control in the air. And I don't think this is something that you can boost by like putting in the athletics or the acrobatics like you would do in Elder Scrolls or something. Like your jump just always kind of sucks, and so it made some of those like platforming sequences a bit savage.
I feel like you get stuck on geometry a lot too, or I at least did when I was trying to like do some of these jumping stuff. Like I was trying to like jump up a set of stairs, and I like got stuck in the stairs multiple times. Like a lot of stuff like that when I was trying to like kind of not necessarily cheese stuff, but maneuver through the world using this jump mechanic. And every once in a while I'll be like, why did I even touch spacebar? This is not the way.
Yeah, thankfully I didn't have any crashes even on the vanilla version, but there was definitely many times where I had to reload a save because I got glitched. And thankfully, like, because I didn't mention this, but at the start of the game I played like an hour and a half, died to a Goblin King, and I was like, I had never saved. Fuck. But then when I restarted, I was able to get back to that point in like 10-15 minutes. I'm like, I am a legend. I'm speedrunning through this thing. I'm like so good at this game now. I know like how these basic mechanics work. But after that point, I was like, I am saving every couple minutes. Obviously, I was using the quick save button to speed around the map, so I was saving a lot in that way. But even like by the end of it, I had like 10, 15 different save slots of different things, or like if I want to go back and maybe try to do this sequence differently, like the ice dragon, I saved right before I killed him, so that if one point I want to go back and actually try and do that the canon way, or not the canon way, but the other way where you I don't know if Dante, if you want to talk about that, but I didn't have enough money to do it, so I was like, well, I'm just gonna fight him rather than grinding to get all this cash. But you want to talk about that section?
Yeah, that's a cool little moment. You go find your way to this dragon that ultimately you require one of its eggs to enchant your sword that Kirkland already had. And you talk to it for a bit, and you're left with kind of two options. You're like, all right, I can either kill this dragon and steal one of its babies, or it will give it to me if I'm knowledgeable enough in dragon culture to be considered a friend of the dragons, right? So the way that you get through that is he says, if you can pay me as much gold as I have scales, something like that, I'll let you have one of these eggs. And you're like, okay, I don't know how many scales a dragon's supposed to have. And if you go back to the Snake Lady's like little library area in the castle, there's the book I mentioned earlier where it's like the different species of Arx, and it says how many scales it have, and it's like 4,000 some. So from that point, I was like, all right, I got to go sell a bunch of shit. I had like 200 gold. So I sold all types of stuff. The Eilcid swords were worth a shit ton, and they had just kind of come through Arx at that point too. So I had a bunch of them laying around Arx. So I just went and did a path and collected all their swords and sold them, and then went back to the dragon, and she takes $4,000 off of you and gives you an egg, and you call it a day. It's a cool little thing that like I
felt bad about killing it for sure.
Oh yeah,
you should.
But at the same time, I was like, I'm not gonna go grind to get all this cash right now. Like I don't want to do that.
Yeah, now I'm best friends with the dragon, and you are a murderer. So
I think for me, the reason I didn't want to do that was specifically because of how annoying the platforming was to get to the dragon.
Yeah,
and I didn't have extra telekinesis stuff at that point. I don't think I had the spell. And so I could have went and found some scrolls or found the spell, but then I was like, okay, that's a whole nother thing. So I think it'd be easier if I just try and kill this thing. And it took a couple saves. Eventually I got that spot where it was glitched behind its piece of ice in the middle of the room, and I was able to cheese it that way with it took me a long time still, even with the cheesing. Like, how would I ever have done this without cheesing this or without just like paying the fine? Like, they made this an incredibly difficult fight. It had so much health without cheesing it. There's no way I would have been able to do that. So Kirkland, I'm guessing you like busted out the Ilsid sword.
I mean, by that point I had killed so many people, it didn't cross my mind to go get these scales worth of gold to buy.
We're already on a rampage.
Yeah, I think I used like the speed spell and fireball and just a lot of retries. It was difficult, even though I was like fully suited up and ready to go. And I mean, like, for this game, for this playthrough, because I had like the Ilsid armor, the meteor sword, I was just like the big brute character. I was like maxing out my defense and my melee stat, and I think that helped a lot because I had like such base stats on my items. But then just boosting it there. And fireball was, I think, just like the one pattern that I just try to remember, because it's very basic. You got the fireball element to it, and it was a hard
effective
fight
against
for
the
sure.
ice dragon.
Yeah.
F5 fireball was like my strategy to get through the entire game. I would literally throw a fireball, I would save, and then I would hope that I could do the magic motion again really quick, and then I would hit F5. I really liked, we didn't talk about this at all, the fact that you could store spells.
Yeah, preloading them.
Spells. Yep. I thought that was incredibly useful. So I would like preload 3 fireballs, and then I would like just, I guess you hit Alt and move your, or you can just, I guess,
you do shift control, I think, right? And then you do the spell.
Yeah, so you do shift. You hold shift when you're coming out of using or finalizing the spell, and it doesn't cast. It just like puts a little icon in the corner. It's super annoying to have to move your cursor over into the corner and click the spell.
Oh, you can hit 1, 2, or 3 to do it as well.
What?
Yeah.
That's so frustrating, because I was like, you should have seen me trying to like have.
Well, especially when you're trying to aim a fireball or something, right?
Yeah, I was the craziest dexterity moments of my like gaming career, trying to like run away from one of these Ilsids and click in the corner at the same time while keeping the camera in the right spot. It was that would have been awesome to know.
Yep.
Once again, some sort of tutorialization in this game would have been excellent.
Yeah.
Here's what these buttons do.
We mentioned that you get to build those swords in the dwarven base. I also want to show. I like the potion making system in this game. Pretty simple. You like get these different ingredients. There's not a ton of them in the world, so it's not that hard to find them. And it's not that confusing to remember them, because they're pretty much color coded, like 4 or 5 different colors. Grind it up in a mortar and pestle. Put that in an empty bottle. Put that bottle on the potion making thing that you can find. Either there's one in Arx, at the city of Arx. There's one in the Ilsid, or not the Ilsid. The Temple of Akba, there's one, and I'm sure there's a couple other ones throughout the game.
On level 4, there's just like a broken down area, and there's one just sitting in the middle of that space. So they give you enough of them for sure.
I'm sure that there's probably one in the like resistance camp with Shaney's like group of people. So yeah, I like that system. It's pretty basic, but I was using it a lot, and it was something that I wanted to get my level high enough so that I could make a bunch of invisibility potions, because the Ilsids were so, like, I was fighting Kirkland all the time in this game, and I was like, I can't do it. They're so strong. So invisibility potions were the second time you go through the Temple of Akba, and there's all the Ilsids in there. Like, I don't think I would have been able to do that. I didn't fight them. I just found ways to get past them and using a lot of invisibility potions as well. So that was definitely a pretty helpful thing to have. And just, before the final fight, I had so many health potions in my inventory because I had just crafted like every spare bottle that I could find. And I like that it's kind of a limited resource is the bottles, but when you drink a potion, you get an empty bottle as well that you can reuse it. So I really like that system. It's pretty simple, but it's a hell of a lot more interesting than any Elder Scrolls potion making, even if it's like a lot less variety to it. It's just I enjoyed it a lot more. So shout outs to that system in the game.
Very Legend of Zelda, the kind of bottle mechanic.
Right, I guess so. Let's see. I guess let's talk about the Ilsid bunker. So, Dante, do you want to talk through some of your tribulations of this sequence, the end game, the final dungeon, as it were?
Yeah, so I've alluded to this constantly, but throughout this game, you find these. Well, I guess I'll back up. You're working your way to this bunker, right? And there's obviously like Ilsids everywhere. So I'm assuming, Dylan, you're working your way towards I forget the name of the actual like Ilcid leader that you're like working your way towards. He's
Yeah.
trying to like summon
I forget his name.
this god, this like Cthulhu like god into this world, who's gonna like destroy the entire land of Arx, right? And you're working your way through this bunker, and there are priests and there are Ilcid like enemies that are the decked out versions of Kirkland. And you can either like stealth your way through, but there's this door at the very end of it with these little kind of pedestals, and they have room for you to put these like triangular looking shaped items. And I'm sitting here like, what the hell is this room? And this is the only way I can get through this door. This is crazy. So as you work your way through this space, you get to like, there's like the room of the guy that you're ultimately the main bad guy you're ultimately trying to kill, and like you find one of those stones in here, and I'm like, oh shit, these are those things that I've been throwing away the entire game. Or just been like stashing in awkward places, and I have no recollection of where any of this stuff is. So cool. you find one in a chest in the main bad guy's room. You find one on the inventory of one of the priests that you kill in this area. So you have 2, and there's 5 total you need. 2 of the other ones are in. Aren't
all 3 in the Temple of Akba? Different spots.
Maybe 3 are in the Temple of Akaba. So you get 2 in there, and then 3 are in the Temple of Akaba. It's
well,
either
I think
two or 3.
I believe 2 of them you'll pretty much find pretty easily, like in a chest, or one of the priests has one. But then the third one in the Temple of Akaba is like in a hidden room where you have to fight the Lich, and you have to fight the Lich. You get locked in that room. I mean, maybe there's a way to get around that without fighting it. But that's where the last one is, which I did not have previously. I didn't even know that room was there, right? But thankfully at this point in the game, when I went back to get it, I was strong enough, and the Lich actually wasn't too bad of a fight, thankfully.
So this is like one of those moments you said that you thought like maybe a couple times you were soft locked. I was like at the final boss door.
Yeah, that's frustrating.
Sitting here like, am I just going to watch a YouTube video? Like, I don't know if I'm going to. So I literally just used my speed spell and ran around every single level of the game for about 3 hours additionally at the end of the game. I was like, I'm gonna do this. It felt so like frustrating to make this far throughout this like classic game, and like ultimately was like, by that point I was having like 6-hour gaming sessions. I was like really digging in my heels and like starting to like get a nice momentum, and felt like I was like starting to really enjoy everything that was thrown at me at that point. And then I got to the end and I was like, you did not do this to me. I felt like personally attacked by so I just start hunting, and I found one was in my room. So I hid one in my room, and it was in a chest there. And then the other one was with the twins. Right. And I sold it to them. So I was like lucky that I found that, because and it sucks that I didn't just like go to these places first, because I was like, no, I definitely didn't hang on to these. I must have just dropped it on the floor. So I went and did a path through almost every single level of the game to find these items that they like, just don't mention are important at all until that very last moment. Luckily, they give you 2 in the very end, so I only had to figure out where the last 3 that I gave up were. But
where was the last one then? The 5th one. So one was with the twins. One was in your house. Where was the other one?
I don't know. It must have been. I think it was still. It was the Lich. It was the Lich. No, it was the Lich. I didn't do that either.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So I went and killed the Lich. I got that one, and then the other 2, I was just like, just wherever. No, it was really
like
weird
I would want
decision.
To do like a console command.
I looked it up.
Like,
I looked it up, and what people were doing. This is insane.
I could not figure out how to use the console commands. I tried.
I don't think you could spawn it. So what people were doing were reaching out, because this happens to. I was looking up message boards, and like this happens to so many people. The best solution for everybody was to email Arkane, and they would send you a save.
Oh my gosh!
Fucking hilarious. That's hilarious.
That's incredible. That like.
Do you think they would still do that today? If you
people were like, it was as of last year. People were doing.
Oh my god!
Oh my gosh!
That's amazing. But
they literally just send you a save to help you get through the door, and then you call it a day.
Wow. That is horrible, but amazing.
It's brutal.
Kirkland, what was your experience with that? I mean, hopefully, maybe a guide had like hinted this to you or something.
Yeah, I don't think I mean, I definitely was peeking on the guide every once in a while, but I feel like I was really following it after like the Akba part. So I didn't have like the Lich Stone initially. That was the one I had to go back for, and then the other two, I think I just had them in my room or something.
Yeah.
I can't even remember now, or like maybe it was just always in my inventory. I really can't remember because part of the thing when I got the super armor at the beginning, it also gave me like a bigger backpack to start with, so I had a lot more inventory space to work with. Yeah, I know. I had a different experience than you guys.
Playthrough, man.
Yeah, I think when I replay this game, I don't think I'd keep the Illicid armor and that weapon, but I would definitely keep that backpack and maybe like a health
That's
potion or
very
whatever else
handy
is
in those
there.
moments, because it's easy to lose inventory space. You pick up a couple things here and there.
Yeah.
Fortunately, like I didn't really have to pick up armor or like weapons too much on the route, but just so many key slots and stuff. You get a key ring like later on, but I didn't have it for a long time.
A key ring?
Yeah.
What's a key ring? Tell me about this.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I literally had like 40 slots used up on keys. I never even dropped them off in my room. I held
You just put
all of them.
It clicks all your keys on there, and
and then you just take that and you drag it onto the chest, and it'll just use the key that you need. Yeah, I can't remember where I got it.
That
Oh,
should
that's
have
amazing.
been how the mechanic worked from the get-go.
Wow.
Yeah, it should have been like how because then
How is that
you're
not a mod for
wasting
this game?
Where is that? I need that right now.
I can't remember. I'm gonna have to.
Man,
Google
next
where
time I
got
play
it,
through this
'cause
game,
honestly,
that's
I
like
don't remember.
I'm looking up where to get
thing
that
you
thing.
go for, right? Like I'm gonna.
So
beeline
it wasn't
this
given to you
thing.
through that like Illicid armor thing. It sounds
No,
like. It sounds
no,
like
no,
you got
no.
it later. Okay.
No, exactly. I had to use the individual keys for a
That
good
sounds
chunk
like a
of the
great
game.
thing to have in Arx. Like one of the shopkeepers should have it.
Yeah,
that would be a great way. Like that would be a good point in the story of like, okay, now I'm like 4 or 5 hours in. Give me that fucking key ring. Oh my god, that is crazy.
That's such a dumb old video game thing to do, where like not only do they realize that their mechanic is frustrating, but they give you a solution, but then they hide it like to the point that I'm sure like 10% of people found this damn key ring.
You could say that about so many mechanics in this game, I guess.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, apparently. So it was Maria in Arx who sold it. I couldn't
wow,
remember.
so it is
now.
early.
Yeah,
Crazy.
it is Arx. Yeah.
Wow.
There you go, kids.
That
That's
one hurts
amazing.
a little. Because that just fixes all of my qualms with the way that you have to click on every single key to get into everything. Like
It's not clear though. It's not clear at all. Sorry.
Is Maria the shopkeeper whose like daughter has gone missing? Must
Like
be, right?
Shaney's mom.
Is that Shaney's mom?
I can't remember really.
Because there's like the one general shopkeeper. There's the lady who sells like potions and the stones, and then there's like the weaponsmith
weapons guy, yeah.
But I remember she was like, "Oh, can you help me find my daughter?" And I thought it was Shaney, but then she's like, I could never like quote unquote turn that quest in, and I tried. I like based on her description, I tried to find that the daughter. I could never do it. I felt bad.
Speaking of quests that seemingly did not work, did you guys do the stuff, the one for Gru, the troll who wants to see the outside world?
No, I tried to.
didn't.
I brought him many different items, gifts, but he even ones that like it was like a troll bracelet or something like that, but he never accepted it. So yeah, did you figure that one out?
He wants a book. So you get eventually figure out, like, you meet his friend, and his friend says something along the lines of like, oh,
Like
he's
in the
always
troll base, is that where the friend is?
Yeah, he's like, he's always had visions of the outside world, or always been keen on the outside world. And then you go to the snake lady, who seems to be the point to solve every single puzzle in the game. That like every side quest, I just go to her first, and she gives you a book that has pictures of the outside world, and you bring it to him, and he gets all excited. He gives you an amulet, which is the same amulet you get when you kill trolls in general, right?
Okay.
And he goes, "This will make it so trolls don't attack you anymore."
Oh.
But it never happened, and you can equip it. So it was just in my inventory, and I would like try and use it all the time, but the trolls always still attacked me.
Right, because there's the ones in the caves, like not in the troll base, but those ones will.
But like apparently, all trolls are supposed to stop attacking you once you have that. And I looked up YouTube videos of it, and it does work, but it didn't work in my playthrough.
So it's not something you put on like a ring slot. It's supposed to just sit in your inventory.
Oh, I tried to equip it. Maybe you can put in a ring slot, and I couldn't figure out like how to properly equip this item. But like I tried a bunch of different ways, and I couldn't get it to work. So I was like, okay, maybe it's just supposed to sit in my inventory, and then I just started killing trolls, I guess. After
Maybe
that.
at that point you had like attacked one or something, so they were already like aggroed
Maybe.
against you regardless.
That's probably true because I did go on,
Something
like
weird
I said, my escapade where I just started going down, up and down every level available to me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably the case, honestly.
So Kirkland, what was the rest of your bunker experience like going through that final dungeon? Because you didn't struggle with the stones, but was there any other struggles you had there?
I had a lot of struggles defeating the Ilcids. I finally met my equal, wearing the same armor as me. That I feel like I wasn't really relying too much on like combat or not combat, like just amplify magic, I guess, until that moment when I was really like just constantly using the speed amplifier, just so you can kind of like duck in and out of their attacks. I would like just keep like bobbing and weaving to try and avoid the attacks there. And yeah, so many hits it took to take these guys down. And I threw out like any possibilities of stealth by like 10% into this game. So I was determined to make it through. But yeah, it was a lot of like cheesing and like just using the movements of like going around kind of like a door like way or like kind of a corner, and then they would kind of get clipped on the side, and then you could get like 2 or 3 hits on. It was a lot of just like abusing the mechanics to kind of cheese it there. And yeah, but by that point I already knew what I was doing. I felt dirty already by just cheating the game, so I had no issues with that part. But yeah, like I thought it was a good like final dungeon because it was definitely challenging. You have these like big souped up enemies that like each one of them is like super super strong. And just also like the death mechanic of like when the Ilcids die and they just have this like explosion thing. It's like it's like a really weird like audio effect. It's so loud too. So yeah, it was. I thought it was good. Like definitely wasn't. I don't think like top 3 moment of the game for me. It was. I think also one of those things where I knew I was at the end. I think I had spoken to you about this, Dylan, where I told you where I was at and you said how close I was to the end. So I was like, fuck, I just got to get through this moment here. And
I think you're ready by the end of that game. They definitely like it lines up kind of perfectly. Like I think I was like if it went on any longer, I would have probably felt fatigued.
I think I probably took me about 20 hours. I know there was a couple days where I left my game open on Steam, so my hour count is like 27 hours or something, but that's definitely not accurate. I think about 20 hours was my playtime to beat the
That sounds about right. I don't think Xbox tracks game time like that. Does it?
I don't think so.
I don't know where to find it if it does. It felt like 20 hours or so as well.
For me, the bunker was there was one really weird part, but essentially, so you get in there before you're actually in the bunker. There's like that little cave very outside where there's an Ilcid guy. So there's a couple like solo guys, and I was able to take them out. But then when you go in the bunker itself, and there's like 3 or 4 of them in that main room, it's like, how the hell am I going to do this? My go-to strategy was I would use the Ilcid speed, and if you go in like down, there's a hallway to the right, and then there's like a staircase that goes down, and then there's like a couple priests down there, and there's like there's like a little forge. So I went down there, killed those guys, and then I would go up, I would bait an Ilcid guy, I'd use my speed spell, run down there, and then they would like really struggle with that forge thing, or at least I could just ring around the rosy them, and then at some point they would ultimately get glitched on like kind of the corner of one, so I could like strike back off. So by the end of it, there was like, I mean, I guess not bodies because they blow up, but they're like all their armor and stuff. There was so many just bodies down in that basement. That's where I did all my slaying. That's where all the bad acts went down. But then the part that messed with me, because when I was using the guide for this part, it was like, okay, bring your Akba stones, and thankfully I had them at that point, so that wasn't really a struggle for me. But when you go in, I think you have to like pick up a candle, right? And you go to like the boss's room, and you like put a candle in a skull, and then opens the key hatch. You guys remember that section?
Yep.
I could not find that key for the life of me. I spent so much time looking around that room. I'm like, is it supposed to pop in your inventory? Does it open this chest that's behind me? I couldn't get in that chest. So I took so long to figure that out. And I think I like watched a YouTube video or something. And I just like how dark it was, how small the key was in the corner. I could not see that thing for the life of me. So that took me the longest, was to figure out. I reloaded my save. I did like I think I killed a couple of the last Ilcids a couple times over because I was like, I do not know where this must be a glitch. I have to try this again. So that was the confusing part for me, was that stinking key.
The hardest enemy in the game is Gamma.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, then the final fight, we've kind of talked about that final boss, but cruising into the end of this thing, I want to talk about something in the credits. I don't know if you guys watch the credits, but there's something funny that happens in them, and then we'll talk about the future of Arx if we'd like to see any of this come back. But anything about the game prior to that we haven't brought up yet, you guys wanted to talk about?
The speed spell sound is infuriating. That's it. It just constantly. I was just like, it definitely was like too much trouble on that thing. I would definitely like turn down my volume whenever I was using the speed spell. That's
Interesting.
Happy it was there though, for sure.
The audio, I definitely like give them credit on, but there was certain moments when I just felt like there was like creature sounds that were way too loud compared to what they should be. Like I was going down this hallway and I just heard this like really ominous thing to my left, and like it's got like like the 3D audio thing, so definitely like give them credit there. But I like look over, I'm like, what the fuck was that? Is that a ghost? I looked down, it was just like a rat that like ran by me, but it sounded so menacing and like larger than what it was. Scared the hell out of me multiple times with that audio. I love that this game had I'm a big Warhammer guy, so I love my Skaven influence in there. You have like the rat assassins, just very similar to them, like living underground. And
those guys were so annoying with the teleporting and the poison
they
weapons.
Steal from you too. They take your stuff.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Those little conniving bastards.
And I didn't have enough decks to use their weapons too, so I was like, I can't even take this thing and
really?
effectively use it.
Man, we definitely went different builds. I had no strength. It was bad. It actually, like, if that would be another suggestion. If you have any interest in using most of the gear in this game, get to 12 strength.
But then also magic is so good. Like that's where I think it is interesting, where they really do incentivize you to use different build. And I think the higher dex is the more effective you are with bows. I feel like if you had a really high dex stat and just did a ton of bow damage, that could actually be really effective and a good backup for not using magic, because that is a ranged combat, obviously, and you can pretty much just infinitely shoot arrows, which is nice. So
I googled it. I had to check that voice actor's name, like I was mentioning earlier. So yeah, he is also in Skyrim. So he played the guy's name is Steven Russell. He played the great name in Arx. What was his name?
Valinor Planix?
Yeah, that was the voice actor that did that. He also does Nick Valentine from Fallout. So like again.
Wow, that's so interesting.
Dr. Sylvain Bellamy from Prey. I haven't played it yet, but apparently I'm gonna experience it. Yeah. And yeah, like he's been dabbled in. He's Corvo Attano as well from Dishonored.
My God, that's so cool.
Reoccurring voice actor. Yeah, so
I love it.
That was
one.
Also in Thief. So this man is.
Yeah, that was obviously a big inspiration for this game.
Yeah, he's
System Shock 2 as well. Those are. Speaking of simulation games, this guy has a type.
That's so fun. Yeah. I love that.
Specifically Mercer Frey from Skyrim. That was the voice that I heard.
Guild guy.
Yeah.
He's Mr. Handy.
Wow, this guy's a legend. Love it.
Yeah,
pretty cool.
Excited to experience him throughout this retro.
Yeah, we're gonna have to. It's gonna be like, where's Waldo?
Yeah, exactly. Well, where is he in Dark Messiah? Let's find out. Okay, let's take our last ad break, and then we just have a couple closing topics here. So we'll be right back. Okay, so I don't know if you guys stuck around in the credits, but they go through all the credits, and then there's an interesting quotes section at the end of the credits that I took pictures of these, and I'll read them off because they are so weird. And I would just be so curious if I ever talked to anyone who worked on this game, an interview, or just, I don't know where I'd bump into them, bump into Raph somewhere. I would love to bring up some of these quotes and say, do you remember any of this? Because none of these make any sense. None of them are funny or witty. They're all just so strange. But here, let me go through some of these quotes. So we have, why did we decide the king shouldn't be aware? Anybody remember? So I guess that was a plot point, is they wanted him to be unaware, but they don't know why. As we said during our last meaning as I said, anyway... ... is one of the interesting quotes. Anyway, right? Why is that in here?
Must
Guys,
be an inside joke.
Coffee time, says Marco. Let's see. Anyway, again, from someone else. So I guess that's a recurring thing. We have, I have an idea. No way, Chris. Damn. That's not in the budget. That's a good one. That's a classic one. Where are the meshes for Arya and Sybil? This one just ARG is one of the interesting quotes. Can't we use Max? No, literally just no with an exclamation mark. I did it with Max. Just an ellipses, ... is one of the interesting quotes. Now do it again with Theo. Too expensive, we'll do without it. Once again, very classic budget thing. Grr, just GRRRR. It reminds me of Underworld. That's a good call out there too. But like, just so weird that this was included at the end of the credits. All these weird inside jokes that don't make any sense and are not funny in any way. So very weird. But in closing out, let's just talk about a little bit about Arx and do we want this thing to come back? Do we think there's a future for this thing? I think originally too, like Dark Messiah was gonna be kind of like an Arx sequel or in that world or something like that. But then obviously Ubisoft came in. It became a Might and Magic game, and that kind of ceased to be. Maybe there's some DNA there. We'll talk about that next time. But so that was like a potential thing. But yeah, what do you guys like? I think for me, just talking about this, first of all, like I mentioned that the original Arx, most of the Xbox Series X catalog, maybe not most, but a lot of it is backwards compatible. Arx Fatalis is not one of those. If you play the version on Steam, very good chance it'll not work on your computer. It's just not, it's outdated in that way. So I think for me, that would be like a first step is like if Arx is going to come back, a good thing to do would be to make the original game playable again. But I also think we're in a weird spot where I think this game is so old and outdated in a lot of ways that you can't just do fix the bugs, fix the glitches, fix the performance, and you can't even just throw like HD textures on there. I think this game would need a lot more work, and considering it wasn't successful and no one knows what it is, like I understand why they would never do that. But I would really love a remaster, but more ideally probably a remake to fix some things in the game and change some features around. Is that something you guys would like to see? Do you think it's worth it, or would you prefer that Arkane just keep going forward and try new things?
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously I was just thinking about this as I was going along with the game of like, because this is a world that I find interesting, like do what I want them to keep going on it, or like you said, like a remake, kind of like the Resident Evil 2 route where it's a remaster, but like they really rebuild a lot of the systems. Because like just selecting from like the UI to like the in-game. Get rid of that shit. I don't want that in any modern video game.
Remove crouch and shift. Like make those make those one button, you know?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. But like but at the same time, it's like, would that be like a good return on investment if they go about doing that? Like, is there a big fan base for Arx and what this world is? I think this definitely has a place of like having like a modern version of it, of just like, again, like what the lore is and the fact that you have Shigar and like his master and like what all, like I still feel like kind of in the blue on some of the specifics of like how that works. And like I also think it is a shame that like there's just going to be so many people that have never and will never experience this story just because of like the datiness, like you mentioned, Dylan. Mm-hmm. So it is tricky. I personally would just want Arkane to focus on like the next projects, because now that I have played this, like I would be intrigued by like a remake remaster, but like even me playing through this, if they had a full price like remaster comes out, I probably wouldn't get it right away just because I feel like I have experienced that story.
It would have that Game Pass element to it where it's an Xbox Studio, so you'd think that would drop on there. And the fact that the original's on Game Pass means that I don't think they had like a publisher for this game really. Like they kind of just did it on their own. But yeah, I feel like they would have to redo all the voice acting for the main actor. And then if you do that, but then you don't do it for everyone else, then there might be some weird disconnect in the audio quality too. So that would be a weird thing, but I think you would have to do that or else people would be like, this game sucks. Like, what is this performance going on? Not to keep ragging on this guy, but obviously it's, not a very expert performance. But how about you, Dante? Do you want them to dip back in this well, whether it's remake or something more, a sequel or something?
Yeah, I don't see it happening, sadly. I think it would be a really cool one to dig back into. And if they were to do like a full remake and like really top to bottom kind of like rethink this entire game and just keep some of the key plot points and the key mechanics in place and just kind of rework the entire thing, that would be really sick. But like the fanfare's not there, you know what I mean? Exactly. So few people played Arx when it like came out, and then to talk about it 20 years later and expect people to care about a remaster, I think is maybe asking a lot. While like Arkane, I think they deserve more visibility. I think they're still working on trying to kind of capture a larger audience. Like we haven't seen like huge sales out of any Arkane games yet.
Dishonored was their biggest hit still, right? Like they have not surpassed that, and that was over a decade ago at this point.
Right. So I think they're still kind of finding their footing and finding like what really engages their audience. And even though I think all of their games are honestly, like they have an incredible track record. So like it is quite a shame that they haven't kind of breached through yet. But I would love to see them reuse a lot of these mechanics. Like I do love this kind of like fantasy setting for an Arkane game, and them using like this magic mechanic. They need to bring something like that back. That magic mechanic is just too cool to just leave in the early aughts. You know what I mean? Like they're the only thing I can think of that has been anywhere near this kind of magic mechanic was like the DS Castlevania games where you used to like draw on the screen. I love the idea of like using the mouse as like a cursor and just like making all of these cool spells. I'd love to see that again. It's just like scrolls and stuff like that. I think it's a cool setting for them. I would love to see if they were to return. Maybe they return to the world of Arx, but they don't return to Arx Fatalis.
Right. Yeah, you don't play as this character again, or
like, they built so much lore here, right?
Yeah.
They have a lot of foundation to work off of that. I think they could turn this into a pretty interesting universe.
Well, I think there's a lot they could do with it. Like just the idea of returning to the surface in a world that has been quote unquote saved by the actions of this game. Like you could even, I think, could get away with that concept of there was this event that sent everyone underground, and that event has, you could say, been lifted, and people can go back to the surface. That idea, just that second half, I think could be an enticing concept for new players. Even if they didn't play Arx and know why you can go back to the surface now, just the idea, it's kind of like a Fallout 3 thing, right? You're leaving the vault, you're going back out to the surface world. And that could be interesting to come to this like frozen landscape where there's villages and cities that are either some of them have been repopulated by like whether it's bandits or other weird creatures. But I feel like that could be pretty interesting. And then, but I don't want them also to lose the roots. Like I still think the idea of going through the underground, the labyrinths, and just go to a different place on this earth, on this planet, right? And that could even be the start of the game, or it could be a hybrid thing where you're above ground and then you have this underground tunnel system that you're doing as well. And, you know, if it's a bigger thing, like you could return to some of the areas in this game as well. That could be a fun thing. And maybe it's been now just completely left behind, and so it's dilapidated and parts of it have caved in, and there's new areas and stuff like that. So I feel like there could be a future for this thing, but it is tricky to justify it, right? Just because it doesn't have much of a name. I almost think it's so obscure that they could get away with doing it, and most people wouldn't even realize that it is a sequel, that the world exists. And like, I don't think they should call it Arx Fatalis 2, right? They should have a different name, maybe Arx, something else, some other name for it, and just keep the ARX part of it or something like that. Could be an idea to go for. But yeah, I would love that remake remaster, but I don't think it's going to happen. And I mean, look at what they do now. Like, they created Dishonored, and they made a trilogy of games there. But then Prey was a new thing that got the Prey name slapped on it, but that's a new IP for them. Deathloop was a new IP. Redfall's a new IP. And Deathloop, weirdly, like, in a way, takes place in Dishonored's universe, as we know. But it's like, that's a stretch even in and of itself. Yeah. And then Redfall is something new, and we don't know what the other Arkane Studios is working on currently. So obviously they're into doing that, and I don't know if they're just searching for another Dishonored, another IP that's so big for them. And I mean, we'll talk about later in this retro, like, well, are they ever going to go back to Dishonored? We'll get into that into later episodes. But yeah, any closing thoughts on Arx Fatalis, this weird RPG from the early 2000s that I'm so glad you guys have come on this journey with me, because I'm so happy to have finally played this game. And yeah, I'll definitely be returning to it at some point. But yeah, any closing thoughts on this thing?
Like I despite me kind of like starting the show off being a little bitter and frustrated about some parts about this game, I do think it's doing some really, really impressive stuff throughout, and it's really nice to see the DNA of what they've taken from this and grown into some really, really like some of the coolest mechanics in video games currently. Like there is clearly a pedigree and it shows that they from like day one were like hitting this really hard and had an idea for what this developer was supposed to be doing. You know what I mean? Like it did a really cool job of like creating an identity for Arkane as a whole versus like them trying a million different ideas and kind of which they still do, right? They have a million different ideas, but really having an identity as a developer, because they could have done this and then went on to do a dozen other games that don't feel like this at all, but you do still see Arkane's like just like blood in Arx at the end of the day, and I think that is it's really cool. They're doing a lot of really, really interesting stuff, and for this to be the first crack at doing something, it's still like one of maybe the most impressive first titles for a studio I've seen in ever. Maybe it's pretty incredible.
Definitely.
Yeah, I like what you said there too, how like you can just see like the roots and like kind of like the systems that they've evolved on. Because I mean, I hinted at earlier when I played Dark Messiah, I thought that was the first title, and I was playing, I'm like, man, this just feels like a Dishonored, but like obviously years prior. And then in Arx, even just like the way that you're like you kind of move your direction with your strikes, and it kind of does a different strike. Like that's in Dishonored as well. So they've just like improved upon it. Dishonored is also like one of like the smoothest games like I've played. Like it just the movement feels so good in it. So it's nice to like see the foundations playing something like this where it is very janky. It's like, man, they did it. they got it right, especially by Dishonored. But yeah, no, I thought this was a fantastic. Again, not to repeat everything I said earlier, but like I'm so glad that we're doing this retro so that I have an excuse to play this, because this is one I never would have gotten to like, at all. Like I probably would have seen gameplay. I'm like, oh yeah, no, I missed that wagon.
Yeah. Well, you boot it up, it wouldn't work, and you'd be like, oh, this frame rate sucks. I'm not gonna play this thing. Yeah, it was $5, whatever. It got on Steam sale, and just dipped.
Yeah, exactly. I certainly got my money's worth though for the hours I put in, for the little chump change I put in.
Yeah. Okay, amazing. This was so much fun. Next time we will be back, of course, talking about Dark Messiah, and then crazy, like jump from that all the way to Dishonored, right? Because there's all those years of canceled games. It's like quite a jump in games. So we're getting into the big stuff pretty soon here. But thank you everyone for listening. Whether you're an Arx diehard fan that's like happy to see some content on this game on the internet, or you are a Dishonored fan, or just a new Arkane fan, or just a Geekverse fan, I want to see what the hell we're talking about with this weird title, Arx Fatalis. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.
See ya.